Oh, good evening, everyone. Sego, Ani, Buju, Ndio, Wacheya, Kwe Kwe. As the Mayor of the City of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share this space now and walk side by side into the future. So we were just meeting in Committee of the Whole closed meeting. We did discuss several items with respect to employment lands, future planning and organizational structure, federal land potential, federal land acquisition or disposition, and also potential acquisition of parkland. So just a reminder to Council that we are going to try to use the eScribe software for our votes, but we'll do that starting with the addeds. So we'll do a couple of hand votes to get started, and then if you have not already signed into the system, just make sure that you do that. So first, I will ask for a motion to waive our procedural rules and have the clerk report, please.
Moved by Councillor Amos, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that Council rise from the Committee of the Whole closed meeting that the rules of Bylaw 2021-41 be waived in the City Clerk report.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Amos, seconded by Councillor Glenn, that Council approve the purchase of 3250 Creekford Road for future municipal use for the purchase price of $1,850,000 plus up to $35,000 in closing costs, and that Council waive the requirement for staff to obtain 2 independent appraisals from certified appraisers when the property value is over $1 million in accordance with the City's acquisition of real property policy, and that the Chief Administrative Officer be authorized to execute the necessary legal documents to effect the purchase of the property known municipally as 3250 Creekford Road in a form satisfactory to the Director of Legal Services.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next we have the approval of the addeds. For the addeds, we have an additional motion of condolence. We have an additional information report, and we have a number of communications. Is there a mover and a seconder for the addeds, please? Moved by Councillor Tozo, seconded by Councillor Osanik. We'll call the vote, please.
Mayor Patterson, we have some members of Council who have not been able to get into the system yet, so we'll continue with the hand votes for now, please.
All right, just let me know if we want to try to switch back. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Amos.
I, Don Amos, Councillor for the City of Kingston, hereby declare my indirect pecuniary interest with respect to report number 70, clause 3, 2024, Municipal Capital Facility Agreement and Bylaw 1300 Bath Road, BGC Southeast, because I'm a member of the body, the Seniors Association Kingston Region, which rents space from BGC Southeast.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other declarations of pecuniary interest? Yeah, Councillor Baum.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I, Ryan Baum of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in closed meeting item 6. Insofar as it relates to Utilities Kingston, this has been duly submitted to the clerks already. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no other declarations, we will move on. We have no presentations this evening, so we will move on to delegations. We have several delegations in front of us. So first, I'll invite Krista Leclerc and Megan Knott to speak to the request for noise exemption for the Frontenac Club. Just a reminder to all of our delegations, you have up to 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from Council.
Okay. Hello? Okay. Thank you very much, Mayor Patterson, members of council, staff, and members of the community. My name is Crystal Leclerc. I'm the Executive Director for Kingston Accommodation Partners, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the noise exemption that's been put forward by the Frontenac Club. I'm not sure how to get the slide to go forward. Enter? Oh. Okay, thank you so much. So the Frontenac Club reopened in the summer of 2020, and so since then, I think it's important to note that they have been hosting live music and dinner music and certain events on their patio, and just recently, after 3.5 years, did receive one complaint, so we're here to kind of address that today and look forward to working out how that might look. Following the complaint, of course, the owners of this fine establishment did work with, reach out to council, reach out to us, as well as community members to make sure that they were informing them of what their plan was. They are asking for a noise exemption so that they can continue to offer live music on their patio for their guests. The Frontenac Club has been very flexible in its offerings and has come to the table to look at how to reduce noise. They have repositioned speakers and things like that to try to make it work for all. And I would also highlight that the live music is just on one night of the week on Thursdays, and then there's dinner music on some of those other nights. And then sometimes there are events like weddings or corporate events that are booked well in advance. They also, too, have 20 guest rooms on site, and I think that that's an important note because everything that they're doing on their patio is respectful of their overnight guests, which don't always align with what's going on in the patio. So they, too, are trying to make sure that their guests are comfortable. It does help them stay competitive, so I think it's really important to note that it is a competitive market and we're always looking for product in Kingston and how to draw visitors to Kingston, and so having an offering like this in a really unique heritage building alongside what can be offered on the patio and then special events and things like that makes us competitive as a destination. Also, I do want to note too that this property came out of the pandemic at a significant disadvantage because they were closed the year prior. They actually didn't qualify for things like SEBA or CEWS. So while their competitors were getting these wage subsidies and pieces like that, they actually didn't qualify for any of that. So really great business model, but they were coming out of the pandemic with a difficult competitive market. So here outlines some of the fixed times that they're requesting, certainly some hours there that they're looking at, and this has all been in front of you in the proposal as well, and a limited number of 5 days. So what I think is really key here is that the 5 days can't be fixed, they have to be flexible because that's how you pre-book business in advance. So if you have groups like weddings looking for a specific date, being able to allocate one of those 5 dates to that requested date would be really critical in this piece. With that, I'll pass it over to Moira.
Hello, my name is Moira DeMorris, and I'm the Kingston Music Officer, which is housed under Tourism Kingston. As the Kingston Music Officer, I stand in support of the Frontenac Club Inn's request for noise bylaw exemption. This is aligned with the Kingston Music Strategy, which was approved by Council on December 2023, which highlights the need for more income opportunities for local musicians, outlined in Pillar 2, Empower and Invest in Talent. Our community has identified low pay and insufficient opportunities as the top challenges faced by artists and music industry workers. This bylaw exemption would create early evening paid performance opportunities in a respectful and respected business. In addition, the Kingston Music Strategy emphasizes the importance of creating more music-friendly bylaws and policies, and exemption is a step in the right direction. By approving, you are not only supporting the Frontenac Club Inn, but also fostering a more vibrant and sustainable music scene in Kingston, attracting both residents and tourists to experience culture in our city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none, thank you both very much. Okay, with that, we'll move to our second delegation. We'll invite Sean Billing and Martin Skolnick also to speak to the request for noise exemption for the Frontenac Club.
Thank you. Your Honor, Mayor Patterson, members of council, staff, neighbors, both here and watching. My name is Martin Skolnick, and along with my business partner, Sean Billing, we are the owners of the Frontenac Club. Thank you for allowing us 5 minutes to address council with the goal of hopefully providing further clarity to our application. We are seeking an exemption to the existing noise bylaw to normalize activity that is both essential to our success as a small business and the continuing investment in our 180-year-old landmark property that we have received a number of heritage awards for. We are not seeking the opportunity to expand our offerings, rather allow us to continue to operate the way we have for the last 4 years in a responsible way until the new noise bylaw can be approved by council sometime in 2025. My partner Sean is managing partner and most familiar with the day-to-day operations in the hotel and the restaurant, and is virtually there all the time. I'm sorry to say. Sean is hopefully going to provide additional clarity to our application, and then we'd be pleased to answer questions that council may have.
Thank you, Martin. We want to do this as a good neighbor. Our neighbors are critical to us. They're our patrons. They refer business to us. In addition to that, we hope that what we've done in revitalizing and refurbishing the club is a point of pride for our neighborhood. We chose to circulate 200 notices out to our neighbors and hand-delivered those in the hope that we would be transparent with our request for this exemption. And we, in those handouts, encouraged people to come forward and talk to us if they had issues or difficulties or suggested amendments. 7 years ago, when we acquired the Frontenac Club, our intention was to restore the property in a manner that would take a tired property and a bit of an eyesore and provide Kingston with the kind of place that we all could be very, very proud of. Particularly a place that would show off the city's history beside its progressiveness. Nearing the completion of the project, which was a multi-million-dollar one to the Frontenac Club, our construction project was stopped by the pandemic. So for over 3 months, we laid there waiting to be able to get back into the building. When we did reopen the club, we opened it at probably the worst travel and entertainment timeframe anyone could imagine. We did not qualify for the vast majority of supports and relief programs that were available to our competitors because we had been closed the previous 18 months. Nor did we have the opportunity to bring people through the club to see the new services or to show it off to Kingstonians for most of 2020 and 2021. We were left really to survive on these challenges on our own. As travel and entertainment have slowly recovered, we've offered services that not only use the assets, the particular unique assets of the club, but that are really consistent with the strengths of our destination. Live music, wonderful dining, vibrant history, small corporate meetings, social celebrations. We truly become a place of occasion in the city, not just for visitors, but also for our own community members and neighbors. One of our greatest assets is our 40-seat bank patio. The space allows us to host small and medium events that we would not otherwise be able to host because we don't have indoor spaces. When we redesigned the patio, we constructed the shed at the back, we repaired the walls, we revitalized the trees, we built a new fence, all with the intention of trying to create a little private enclave. Quite honestly, the conversations we had were about how do we make sure that we protect noise from the neighborhood, how do we protect noise coming in from the street, where we have some average of 10,000 cars driving by us, and also how do we protect noise from our in-house accommodation guests who may be staying with us and not participating in a given event.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Most frequently, we host public dining on the patio from mid-May to September. 3 days a week, this is with just light dinner music. 1 day a week is with live music. The kinds of events that we book are usually duets or single acts, solo artists, playing folk, country, jazz music, those kinds of things. We really want to be clear with our request. We are not requesting or seeking to have events every day. We're not seeking to have speeches or music 7 to 11 hours a day. But what we are seeking to do is to be able to say yes when our clients need it.
Great. Thank you. I'll just pause there. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Chase.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. I read the report, and 2 questions. Thursday, it's included in your weekend schedule, being open till, say, 10 p.m. I would consider that a school day, so people will go to work on Friday, and or in the spring and the fall, children are going to bed earlier in order to go to school on the Friday. So I'm just wondering if you could explain why Thursday is included that and not within the Sunday to Wednesday time slot.
Thursday happens to be the night that we currently hold live music. Those performances are between 5 and 7 only, Councillor.
Okay, so they're done before 7, before 9. Okay, that makes me more comfortable. And what about having performances which are unplugged? Has that been considered?
We do. Several of the performances are without amplification. From time to time, amplification is important for the instrument that may be played by the entertainer, or in particular, we probably use amplification, more when there's a speech or a short corporate presentation on the patio.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to our third delegation this evening. We'll invite Rachel Dornicam to appear before council to speak to the Inclusive Play Project.
I think, are we waiting for, are they on the Jumpstart staff? Are they on? Yeah, okay, because we have questions after. So, yeah, okay, all right. So good evening, Mayor Patterson, council, and city staff. My name is Rachel Dornicamp, and this is my colleague Sarah Ogilvie, and we are here to give you an update tonight on the Inclusive Play Project. So as you might recall, we first came to approach council back in September of 2023 to pitch our idea about a fully inclusive playground here in Kingston. Since then, we have raised over $200,000 towards our efforts. These efforts have included a frozen themed breakfast, as well as a Domino's Pizza grand opening and our first annual Inclusive Fun Fair, which saw thousands of attendees and over 40 community agencies represented. We have had several large community donors graciously come forward to support us financially, and we also are very excited to announce that IPP is currently involved in advanced conversations with Canadian Tire Jumpstart regarding a potential partnership around our project.
In terms of community involvement, you may have noticed the small, really large group of people outside prior to council today. Throughout this process, we have been thrilled with the response from the community in terms of moving forward. Both school boards participated in a board-wide Accessibility Week campaign this year. And as Rachel mentioned, we had our first annual Inclusive Fun Fair, which saw over 40 community agencies who work with individuals with special needs and or children in the Kingston area join. We've also recently completed an online survey where we had almost 200 responses. Throughout that survey, we found that 98% of people who responded felt that Kingston playgrounds currently do not meet our community's needs. 98% also said that they did not feel that Kingston playgrounds were inclusive to all. 85% said that they did not feel that our playgrounds currently address the age span of 0 to 12 years, which is what is currently stated. On our survey, we also had hundreds of responses that were added to the questions that we asked. I'd just like to take a moment to share a couple with you. One of them stated, "The lack of inclusive play spaces isolated my daughter from her peers and has caused long-term mental health and social difficulties. If she had been able to continue enjoying her friends after she began using a wheelchair, she would likely not have the struggles as significantly as she does." We also heard from a number of families who indicated that the current Kingston parks do not meet the needs of families who have multiple children at different ages and stages and abilities.
So just a few things to talk in terms of lessons learned. So when we first pitched this idea, it started as a park, and then it became a fundraising campaign. And now what we have on our hands is very clearly a movement that grows by the day, and we are so excited to be a part of it. And these conversations are just beginning, and we would like to be a part of those conversations too. As you could see by the amazing group of people that were outside today before council meeting, the community has a strong desire for more inclusive and accessible play spaces in Kingston, not just around physical ability, but also around age. Kingston playgrounds are not currently meeting the community's needs. The Kingston Parks Master Plan highlights several action points that need to be further addressed. We as a community group would like to be a part of these conversations as the city works to put their identified goals into action. In terms of next steps, given the incredible success of our fundraising efforts in less than a year, IPP is now requesting $300,000 from the city to cover the civil costs required to build the playground. IPP is also requesting the city cover the rental fees for our 2025 Inclusive Fund Fair. It is really important to note that IPP has applied for close to $700,000 in provincial and federal grants, and we were denied all of them on the grounds that they felt that this was a municipal responsibility. So we would request that city staff help explore further funding options and sponsorships for this playground, because we put in the work and were denied because it was deemed municipal. Thinking to the future, IPP would like Council to provide tangible strategies around engaging community stakeholders to ensure that inclusion and accessibility are forefront in the development of new playgrounds and the upgrading of existing ones. Thank you, Council, for listening. Thank you to everyone that came out to our delegation celebration outside, and thank you to Canadian Tire Jumpstart for joining us as well.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from Council? Councillor Glenn.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the incredible work you're doing to really make the city a more inclusive place. I think even the tenor of this is changing the way we think about other spaces. So you spoke about the action points in the Parks Master Plan that need further attention. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely. So one of the things that has been interesting for us as we were reading through the Parks Master Plan, and I mentioned this in the presentation, is that we don't want this to be the only park. Given the incredible success of the fundraising and just the response from the community, we want to see more of these. So when I went to the master plan, there was just some interesting points that I wanted to pull out and just kind of address. So the first one was talking about partnership with school boards and other institutions. Given our incredible relationships that we have with the school boards and with all the different community partners and agencies, this is something we want to see more of when parks are being designed or when they're updating parks that need it, getting those community members involved, because they are the ones that are on the ground doing the work with these groups, and they know about inclusion and they know about accessibility. The other one is talking about, the line is consider incorporating emerging trends in playgrounds when renovating them, but also consider new amenities with high play value. This is something I have done an incredible amount of research around, and I think for me, what I want to know is what that high play value looks like from city staff, because when I talk to different municipalities and I see the play equipment that's out there, we're really behind here, and I think there's a lot more we can offer. I cannot tell you how many families travel to Napanee to take their kids to the playground because it's got a two-tiered playground, and that's what kids like. I was talking to a young man, he's 11, and he said, I don't want to leave the playground because I'm bored. I want to leave because I'm tired. And we don't have anything like that here to offer, and I think it should be the other way around. I want to bring families here. I want them to come here for the day. I want them to have fun here, not sending them out to neighboring municipalities, because that's where the fun is. And then the last one is, it says, the city should consider partnership for larger destination playgrounds at regional scale parks. And my curiosity is, why has it waited until we as a community group have come forward to pursue some of these relationships, such as with Jumpstart, who you'll hear from in a moment, because this is where we're going to build these parks, is with these incredible partnerships. So these are just some pieces that we've read about kind of as we've gone along, and these are just questions that we've kind of had as a group about how to make it better moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. So 2 questions. For one, $200,000 in less than a year is amazing. Congratulations. Can you tell us a bit more about the IPP's future fundraising plans?
Oh yeah, we're just getting started, let me tell you. So we have a bunch of events coming up. On Sunday, we have a Back to the Farm event at McKinnon's Brewing Company. It's a massive event, thousands of people, so we're really hoping to gain some awareness for the project there. We've got a Roundup campaign coming up through Giant Tiger in September, Motion Ball online auction, working on new grants as they come up, the ones that we can actually apply for. And we just received a grant yesterday from the Bay of Quinte Mutual for over $10,000, which put us over the $200,000 mark, which is very exciting. And we're already planning our second annual Inclusive Fun Fair. It's been made very clear we need to do that event again. It was so well received. Yeah, we're really hoping that we're going to just keep hitting the ground running and bringing in as many funds as we can.
Thank you. And you mentioned Jumpstart. I'm hoping to hear a bit more about the Jumpstart and their interest in the IPP. And are you or anybody else able to speak to that?
So I believe they are on virtually, so I don't know if that's possible or not.
There we go. Mr. McReynolds?
Good evening, Mayor Patterson, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here representing Jumpstart this evening. So I can certainly address that question in terms of Jumpstart's interest in this particular project. And I'd first start by saying I'd commend Rachel and the delegation and city staff. It's been a pleasure to be in conversations with them over the past number of months in terms of exploring our potential involvement in this project. And we've had the fortune of working with a number of municipalities in over 55 projects since 2017. We've built over 550,000 square feet of new play space across the country, and we're always looking for opportunities for these community-led projects. And I would just say that the way that Kingston and the city is working with community, and obviously we've got the champion support of our free Canadian Tire dealers in the city as well, is best in class in terms of actually having a consolidated approach, identifying a need, and actually working to meet that need. So from our perspective at Jumpstart, we're interested from 2 different perspectives. Number one, we're here as a resource. We've built these play spaces across the country. We've got 7 or 8 years of learning, research. And so we've been acting as a bit of a resource in terms of providing some direction and sharing our learnings on how to best navigate these types of projects. The other lens is that we've got a selfish interest in potential investment in this project as well. So that's something that we're working out on our end, again, with the support of our local Canadian Tire dealers, but there's been a lot of interest. There's definitely an established community need. But I think what's more exciting, what Rachel spoke about, is that it's not just about the asset, it's about the movement. And I think that's one thing that we really take to heart. It's accessibility isn't a destination, it's a journey. And the playground is one piece of a bigger puzzle, but what gives us encouragement, again, is the delegation, senior activities, the amount of fundraising that's been done in such a short time. The support of city staff as well has put us in a great position to be able to progress our conversation. So certainly we are committed to working with the group and the city on being a resource. And now for us, we do want to expand on the conversations with respect to large-scale investment as well.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Shapes.
Thank you. And thank you for all your advocacy in regards to this project and continuing. I do agree that there are deficiencies within most of our parks in regards to accessibility and with age groups from young to old for them to have something to do, because it's a good place to release stress. Because I've been advocating this, trying to expand the master plan. My question is, I wanted to confirm this because I think I've heard it. Once you're done and this project is in place, are you staying on to advocate as well? Because the greater number of voices we have to get this done would be a great asset.
So in terms of our involvement continuing in the future after this park is built, yeah, we strongly feel that there needs to be a continuation of looking at all of the parks in Kingston, whether that be refurbishing or whether that be new builds, through an accessible lens. One of the things that we really believe in is that as members of the community, we can't hold the responsibility of funding all of those parks. But we certainly believe strongly in the movement and believe if we would welcome the opportunity to be part with City Council in terms of any future steering committees or any sorts of ways that we can assist in that process moving forward.
And can I just add too, I think it's important to be clear that the expectation is that not all of the parks are going to look like this, because that will cost millions of dollars. But what we have learned is that there are also very creative ways to refurbish spaces you already have to make them more accessible and inclusive without breaking the bank, and that's very strategic.
I agree, and thank you for your service now and in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Ostroff.
The questions were asked, Mayor Patterson. That's good. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. First off, thank you for stepping up and everything that you've done to kind of move the dial on this. I guess based on your survey, 98% of people replied that they weren't really seeing value in our current playgrounds. And I'm sure we spend millions on our playgrounds as they are, but yet we still seem to be missing the mark. So that's very concerning and disappointing, to be honest. So my first question is, what one thing would you change in our city approach to move the dial forward on this? What's one thing if you had a wish list?
Sure. I think one of the things that we noticed in a lot of the responses is that there are a lot of small parkette type places throughout Kingston. And while that makes it so that it's easy to get to one, people are finding that there isn't the play value in terms of wanting to stay for a longer period of time. Or if you have children of multiple different ages, there aren't things there that are interesting for all of them. And so I think that really kind of struck us in terms of how do you find to develop a space that not only meets the needs for not one age group or ability, but kind of how do you find a way that people can play together and want to stay. We want Kingston to have destination parks. As Rachel said, we know that they all can't be, but a lot of people, their comments were they seem to find that it's the same park in multiple different places. So even if you're wanting to travel and trek out a new park, you go to the new park and it's the same thing.
Okay, so just building on that, thank you for that. So it seems like what I'm hearing is we're building not parks that are big enough, but also not parks that are accessible enough. So we need to sort of incorporate both elements here, but to create a larger space park rather than just a whole bunch of little mini parks all over the place that don't appeal to people across different age ranges and abilities.
Yeah, one of the things too, when you talk about graduated risk, so opportunities for kids to try new things, to not just be, a swing, but to have climbing objects, to have all sorts of different kinds of ways that kids can become active, that kids can take risks, that kids can learn all sorts of things that extend far beyond just a park.
And I think to add to that, the thing that's really great is there are other municipalities have done this really well, and rather than reinventing the wheel, it's important to find out where those places are, and we are happy to help with those conversations because we have done nothing but live and breathe this for the last year. There are some that do it really well, not only in terms of their new builds, but also just in terms of their refurbishing of parks, to really make those spaces where families, like Sarah said, they want to come and they want to stay and they want to go for lunch and they want to do all of those things that make the space very community focused. And I do think there's a way to do that, like I said, without spending millions of dollars. It just has to be very strategic.
Thank you so much for your answers and for your time.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, thank you both very much. Okay, so I've been informed by the clerks that I think that we are ready to go back with our voting system. So before we move on, I'll ask if there are any additional delegations to add. Councillor Son?
Yes, I have a delegation to add Shauna Cunningham. Okay, that's on the screen.
Okay. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Sanik, that we waive our procedural bylaw to allow Shauna Cunningham to appear before council to speak to new motion number 3 with respect to television journalists, radio personalities, and on-air programs. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Oh, I'm sorry. Here, we're supposed to use the electronics. Sorry. Okay, we'll try that again. Oh, next one? Okay. This one we'll do with the vote. Okay. Other delegations? Councillor Glenn?
Hello. So through you, I'd like to add Floyd Redmond, please.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Sanik, that we waive our procedural bylaw to allow Floyd Redmond to appear before council to speak to new motion number 2 with respect to the Pollinator Gardens. So we'll call the vote. Okay, and that carries. Are there any other delegations? Councillor Glenn.
Yes, I'd like to have Molly Raffin and Maddie Rowan added, please.
Okay, moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Sanik, that we waive our procedural bylaw to allow Molly Raffin, Director of Student Life, Queen's University, and Maddie Ronan, Orientation Roundtable Coordinator, to appear before council to speak to clause number 1, report 70, with respect to the request for temporary noise exemption, Queen's University Orientation 2024. We'll call the vote. And that carries. Okay, last call. Are there any other delegations? Okay, if not, then we'll now proceed with those 3 added delegations. So first, we will invite Shauna Cunningham to speak to council with respect to new motion number 3, again, with respect to television journalists, radio personalities, and on-air programs.
Sorry about that. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. My name is Shauna Cunningham. I'm a longtime member of the local media. I left the CKWS newsroom earlier this year, and I now work in communications, and a few of my former coworkers, some familiar faces, are joining me tonight. There's Monica, familiar voices and faces. The motion before you tonight to support local journalism follows drastic cuts that you've heard about at Global Kingston, Big FM, and Fresh Radio. Over 20 people were let go. The building that they worked in will soon be shuttered and sold, bringing an end to the long broadcasting legacy out of 170 Queen Street. At the time of the layoffs, Global Kingston was putting out 5 hours of local programming a day. Both radio stations had live announcers in the morning and then again in the afternoon, and Big FM even had a local announcer in middays, which is rare for a market of this size. So what is left now? Well, on the radio side, there's nothing left. All programming is now coming from different markets, so Ottawa, Cornwall, Barrie. On the TV side, it's now a bureau operation, so there are 3 videographers that remain. They will soon be joined by a supervising producer and another part-time videographer. 2 sales reps will continue to service the local advertising clients. Videographers will now contribute to a half-hour broadcast that's pre-recorded by an anchor out of Peterborough. They will be working towards earlier deadlines, of course, with their stories having to be ready well ahead of airtime in order to be sent to Toronto. Of course, that's going to impact things for breaking news. That will no longer be something that they can pull off. Of course, when there was a live broadcast, we could add late-day statements and interviews to provide fair and balanced coverage. That will be no more. I can't tell you the number of times, actually, that our top story was minutes or even seconds from us going to air. So that's not going to be something that they can do anymore. Of course, sports has never been a big part of the Global News brand. If you watch, Global News Toronto, they don't even have a dedicated sports segment, but it was for CKWS for decades, putting local athletes and teams in the spotlight. Staff loved putting together special programming, municipal election debates, year-end news specials, Santa parades, live cut-ins at special events like when the Briar came to town. Of course, a highlight for many was Bill Hall doing the weather live from viewers' brightly decorated front lawns in the weeks leading up to the holidays. It's really sad to think that all of that is over now, and that viewers in this region are now only getting the bare minimum of content that is allowed under the broadcast license. So there are no easy answers as to why this happened. or if the damage can ever be repaired locally. Those are answers and decisions that will best be left to the policymakers in Ottawa and the CRTC. We do know that one of the reasons why Kingston was so hard hit by these cuts is technology. So before the pandemic, our sister station in Peterborough underwent a massive renovation, and a big piece of that was technology that linked them to the rest of the Global News brand. So this same type of renovation was discussed for Kingston, but it just never happened. So while Kingston's operations were gutted, Peterborough lost about a dozen people the day before the layoffs here, and they will continue to operate as a broadcast center. There are, of course, generations who grew up watching CKWS and listening to our radio stations over the years. CKWS was there to capture our history, the aftermath of the ice storm, the dramatic moments that a crane operator was plucked from the sky as a raging apartment fire consumed a massive construction site, even this room that we're in tonight. There are residents who have never actually been inside council chambers, but they could describe this room down to the iconic light that is hanging above us tonight because they've watched CKWS coverage over the years. Your community, your news, that used to be our motto for a long time. Make no mistake, local journalism in this country is under attack right now, and Kingston is just the latest community to take a direct hit. The Heritage Station, of course, built up a loyal audience over the last 7 decades. We were about to celebrate 70 years this fall. We hope that that audience continues to support the work of our remaining colleagues. For those who are no longer on the air, they didn't get a send-off deserving of their contributions to this community. And for that reason, we're actually holding a public goodbye on Saturday, August 17th at the Royal Kingston Curling Club from 3 to 5 p.m. This event is being organized and put on by former employees and the union, Unifor. We hope to see you there, and I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Tozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. This was devastating for the community. I fully support Councilor Hassan's, or Deputy Mayor Hassan's motion tonight. What can we do at a municipal level? That's the number one question I get asked is what can we do? We can't fund a network, but what advocacy or what can we do to help? Because this is such a hit to our community.
Do you want to take this? Sure. Bill Hutchins, everyone.
Mr. Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us here tonight. That's a very good question. There are no easy answers. I mean, you've probably heard and read as Shauna was alluding to, the media that's under attack in this country due to a shortage of revenues, and it's impacting communities across the country, and print and radio and now television. And I used to say to a lot of our viewers, and I do public events, and I say, consider yourselves fortunate, Kingston, that you have a local television station, speaking from my point of view, because a lot of communities don't have that, or they had it and lost it, and now we're part of that unfortunate group. We're federally regulated, so I would say, if you can lobby, and there's a motion Councillor Hassan, I believe, has on the floor later on tonight, to lobby your local MP, area MPs. The CRTC, the Federal Broadcast Regulator, is the body that regulates us. Unfortunately, it's not a municipal responsibility. As much as we cover and rely on that's our bread and butter for news, right? Is municipal governance and municipal issues. And but we're federally regulated, and that's how it works. So anything you can do unless you can pick up the phone and call Chorus Global and get them to change their minds, which I don't think that's going to happen, but it's just a sad reality. So yeah, if you wanted to reach out to the local MP, Mr. Gerritsen, or Mr. Barrett, the area MPs in the area, and the CRTC, they would be the ones that might be able to at least put some more money into our industry, because that's really what did us in. So, thank you.
Sorry, and just a follow-up question. Is this a federal issue where a subsidy is needed? This is where it has to come from, correct? This is definitely something this is something the federal government has to step in and help the market out, because clearly this isn't working, right?
I think the model is broken. Again, speaking for conventional television in the city, having a TV station decades ago, and again, Shauna was saying we were about to celebrate our 70th anniversary as a local broadcast center. Having a license to broadcast used to be a license to print money, but that has changed, and I'm sure you've read and heard about Facebook and Google and ad revenue that's been bleeding away from conventional television. Subsidies help, for sure, and I know Global, our former employer, was counting on that. Federal legislation was passed to help provide subsidies, or at least a portion of the ad revenue that the big social media giants were collecting, to funnel some of that back into the companies that generate that material. But that money did not come soon enough. So I don't want to say, I'm not in the business of running a TV station, but subsidies, I'm sure wouldn't hurt in this day and age. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hassan.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today, and I really appreciate your services for Kingston and keeping all the 70 years the Kingston update politically, socially, and economically, and keep us briefing. Many of you I met through the many public events and supporting the community, and there was immense of support for local community, local charities. We have the presentation today from the IPP today, so such event, Monica, Shauna, and you guys all been great to that one. My question is how the Kingston community can stand up for our local media house to continue to support. Now it was a global TV or Course Entertainment. Now, next we have here Big Standard, which is also on the brick probably, and the risk as well. So to your experience, 70 years being in the media house, what you suggest are the local community, how we can stand up and support so we can bring that media house back and also can support the Big Standard and other local media to stay in business?
Is there anything else you want to add to your previous answer?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hassan. It's a tough question, and there are no easy answers to that. How you can support it, I wish there was a magic answer. What happened was shocking to all of the people affected a couple of weeks ago. But I think it was even more shocking to viewers because they weren't told in advance. They didn't know. And we have a loyal audience that we built up over the decades who tuned in. It's like, what am I watching? Where'd our local news go? And when you're yanked off the air suddenly and not given a chance to get back on the air to explain, you're left with questions in the community. So through your worship, I wish there was a simple answer, Mr. Hassan, to that question. Again, lobbying federal regulators. They regulate this industry, at least the broadcast industry for radio and television. Thank you.
To Mr. Hudson again, would you think that if local community and support the other, like a Big Standard, Kingston, and all other media, rely on subscription? Because subscription is also, getting lower and lower. That's why it's also difficult for them. Do you suggest the local community to step up and maybe provide a subscription so we can have the local media still?
Sure. I mean, that's where a lot of them are going right now for digital and print. Paywalls, subscriptions, whatever they can do to raise money. In our case, it was advertisers, commercials. If you see an ad on TV, support that local advertiser, because that in turn is supporting us. So if you can shop local and you see a local ad and support that business, because their revenues were supporting us, and unfortunately we weren't getting enough of those kinds of revenues, and so now we have to sign off permanently. Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Shauna, Monica, Bill, Mark, Doug, Mike, thank you for coming. But if I can say on behalf of council and the community, thank you for your years of service telling the stories of our community. It's meant so much to us. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, our next delegation. Find it here. We'll next invite Floyd Rudman to appear before council to speak to new motion number 2 with respect to Pollinator Gardens.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My advocacy is that the city modify its street use and property standards bylaws to allow pollinator gardens on city boulevard lawns and on personal private lawns. Many aspects of bylaws reflect community standards, especially when it comes to what is good looking. When my grandmother married in 1909, her family corseted her waist down to 18 inches to make her beautiful, and everyone would agree that was good looking. In ancient China, they used to bind women's feet to make them beautiful to the point that they're crippled. Well, green lawns around houses are like that. The whole idea started in the 1500s with wealthy people in Northern Europe and England. They wanted a big expanse of grass around their property so they can see bad people coming and shoot them, and so they can display how much wealth they have to waste on completely useless property. The first lawns in North America were on the plantations, where they had slave labor to maintain this, where they earn enough money to waste land on that scale. So that's what lawns are. I agree, I'm in this culture. A green lawn, to my feeling, looks nice, but the world is changing and our standards are changing. Many major cultures like Japan, China, even when you go to Greece and Italy, they're pleasant to go to because there's no lawns. It's not a universal thing. City of Kingston should not still be mandating green lawns around houses and forbidding anything that's not grass. That should stop. Climate change is real, despite what Donald Trump and some politicians might say. Every number about climate change is going worse and worse, faster and faster. If it's heat, ocean acidification, glaciers melting, numbers of bad storms, it's going worse and worse, faster and faster. The city should be encouraging the city's citizens, the residents, to do things to help mitigate and maybe even slow some of this climate change. One of the big consequences of climate change is we're in a mass extinction. We don't yet see it with the big mammals like polar bears and us, but we do see it with insects, amphibians, reptiles, fish. Species are dying now at a mass rate. We humans also are animals. We also have habitat, and we depend on insects for the existence of our food and our own existence. It's a kind of a paradox now that residential areas like Kingston are kind of a sanctuary for many kinds of insects because of industrial agriculture that uses pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers. Bees and other insects are having a hard time in the agricultural lands where they could be having a safe haven in places like Kingston. My third point is outdated laws that are left on the books become a source of misuse and mischief and injustice. In my own case, there's 4 boulevard gardens on my short lawn. They installed about 5 years ago in response to David Suzuki's requests about having highways for insects to migrate. One of these boulevard gardens was on the lawn in front of a bylaw enforcement officer's own house. After 5 years, this summer, a resident on my street, whom I don't know who it is, called bylaws that my boulevard garden's violating bylaws. The bylaw officer showed up, said, yes, this is a violation of city bylaws. You've got 2 weeks to turn this garden into sod. And I said, you can't grow sod in August in Kingston in 2 weeks. Like that's, the mandate I was given is actually biologically impossible. So the person that did this and the bylaw officers that enforced it knew that this is not about gardens. Otherwise, they would have mandated the other gardens to be removed and they would have complained earlier. So this was purely a use of an old bylaw for the purpose of mischief. So it's important that out-of-date laws be removed from the books. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond. Could you tell me what you have planted in your boulevard?
I originally started with just a conventional butterfly pollinator mix you can buy at Canadian Tire and other seed stores. There's, what are they? Echinaceas, poppies, bachelor buttons. I wasn't ready for all that question. I've got some perennials like catmint, lavender, a lot of, what's it called? The small yellow flower. Calendulas, which reseed themselves. The bees really like these. When the enforcement officer was at my presence, he noted there's a lot of bees in my garden. And there were. You could look and see 20 bees working at the flowers in my boulevard garden.
Thank you very much, and you answered my second question, which was, so how many pollinators do you get to see? And it sounds like those flowers attract an awful lot. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you very much, sir. Okay, now we'll move to our final delegation. We will invite Molly Raffin and Maddie Ronan to speak to council with respect to the temporary noise exemption for Queen's University Orientation 2024.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Molly Raffin. I am the Director of Student Life in the Student Experience Office. And I am one of two frontline folks among many, but we are the primary points of contact for Fall Orientation 2024. I work in a unit part of the Division of Student Affairs at Queen's University as a university representative. And my colleague Maddie, who will introduce herself in a moment, represents the Alma Mater Society run by students.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Molly, for the introduction. Lovely to see you all, and thank you so much again for giving us a forum to be able to speak to you, and especially to Councillor Glenn for passing this motion to let us come in front of you all today. My name is Maddie Ronan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Orientation Roundtable Coordinator for the Alma Mater Society. I oversee all aspects of faculty orientation for Queen's University. Together with overseeing faculty orientation and Molly on university orientation, this makes up all of fall orientation. To give a brief overview of fall orientation at Queen's University, it runs from the evening of Saturday, August 31st to the evening of Sunday, September 8th, with the exception of Tuesday, September 3rd to Thursday, September 5th, which are academic days and all students will be in class. This year, for fall orientation, we have a focus on refining events rather than starting from scratch and building up new events from scratch. With that being said, many orientation events, which I'm sure you have all seen and know which are very cherished, are the same this year. There are only 2 new events in city spaces, which are being hosted in the same city spaces that we always use within the same time frame. Evening and night events are scheduled to align with the orientation schedule, aiming to fit best with the nature of their event themes. With an incoming first-year class of over 5,000 students who participate in fall orientation, spaces on campus are being used efficiently. Using City Park, in addition to campus space, builds positive working relationships with student groups. Indeed, myself and Molly have been working closely with the city events team to coordinate all fall orientation events held on city spaces. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Shapes.
Thank you for your presentation. I noticed on the schedule this year that there's actually a sanctioned concert, I believe behind Kingston Hall. I'm just wondering, is there any other events scheduled or other activities or other avenues to divert students from going to unsanctioned parties? Because when I used to go to Queens, we used to have sanctioned street concerts on Union Street, and I don't recall there being unsanctioned parties. So I'm just wondering, is there any other activities or any things you could use to divert, even though I do think it might be a little too late right now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your question.
Harm reduction and keeping university students away from partying is a massive focus within the whole conversation of transitioning first-year students to university life. In every evening between the first orientation weekend and the second orientation weekend, there are planned activities, those being Tricolor Club Fair, meet and mingles, and different residence life meetings with the goal of bonding incoming students to meet new people without participating in any unsanctioned activities within the city grounds.
Okay. So is there a student code of conduct?
There is a student code of conduct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions then, thank you both very much. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our delegations. So now we'll move on to briefings. We have one briefing this evening. At this point, we will turn it over to Kingston Police. Deputy Chief Lillian Murdoch, Inspector Matt Funnell, and Scarlett Isles, Director of Finance, Kingston Police, will brief Council on Information Report number 5 with respect to the Kingston Police Service Board operating budget status as of June 30th, 2024. Folks, welcome, and I shall turn it over to you. Deputy Chief, we can't hear you at the moment. I'm not sure if there might be an audio issue at your end.
That should work. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, as mentioned, my name is Lillian Murdoch, and I'm the Acting Deputy Chief for Kingston Police. And we would like to thank you for this opportunity to present our quarterly budget report, which provides a financial status update on the general operating budget for the Kingston Police. As of June 30th, 2024, our overall net operating budget position stands at 49.22% of the total budget. Both revenues and expenditures are tracking as expected and/or reflect anticipated seasonal and timing variances. At this time, I would like to invite our Financial Director, Scarlett Isles, to provide an overview of her report. I also wanted to make mention that I also have Inspector Matt Funnell here who can assist in answering any questions anyone may have this evening, and as well the Executive Administrator to the Office of the Chief, TJ Romanek.
Okay, thank you.
Scarlett?
Yep, through you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mayor Patterson and members of council. With respect to the financial results, as Acting Deputy Chief Murdoch noted, revenues and expenses are tracking as expected and reflect regular expected seasonal and timing variances typically experienced year to year. Staff continue to remain diligent with spending, and I do really want to commend the entire management team for all the efforts being put forth to managing the budget this year. As well, staff can continue to pursue grants and other funding opportunities and look for ways to reduce expenses and manage discretionary spending where possible to offset cost pressures. As noted in the report, additional one-time provincial grant funds received for Next Generation 911 is offsetting staffing costs, and this is really helping our bottom line. Notable variances are discussed in the report, so I will not do a repeat of that information, but instead focus on potential risks and cost pressures that could impact results for the remainder of the year. We are moving into the third quarter, which, as you know, also means the return of students and homecoming. While the 2024 budget does incorporate estimated costs associated with policing the mass gatherings, there wasn't a second homecoming weekend in 2023, which really helped in keeping costs lower than previous years. We are hopeful that this will be the same for 2024. Planning as it relates to homecoming is already well underway, and we continue to look at ways that we can lower these costs. This includes really looking at how we are staffing and scheduling, including shift changes where possible to limit overtime. Budget pressures continue to be experienced in absentee costs related to WSIB, sick leave, as well as accommodated workers, including officers that are not frontline deployable. Our 4 collective agreements did expire at the end of December 2022, and although we have included an estimated labor contract settlement amount, depending on where we actually land, there could be an impact either positively or negatively. And again, there are always other unknown and unbudgeted requests that arise, highly dependent on the occurrence of major incidents in a policing agency. Thank you for listening, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Rich.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So I just want to focus on one item that really stuck out to me, which is the travel budget, which is 124%, and we're reporting for 50% of the way through the year. And it's noted in the report that travel is, and I'm quoting, travel is primarily budgeted within the education and training account, and thus the overage in this account should be offset against that account variance. Would you mind expanding upon that explanation, please?
Yes, sure. Certainly I can explain that a little bit. So essentially what has typically happened in the past is that all of the education and training, so that would be like the conference costs, all the travel, the accommodation and everything was getting budgeted in the one account. Now what I'm trying to do for accurate accounting purposes is to actually code the expenses in the accurate accounts so that we can budget properly going forward. Unfortunately, for 2024, we didn't catch it, and all the budget was really put in that one line. So you really need to combine those 2 lines together to get an accurate picture. So that's what that is.
I'm sorry, what was the other line that we needed to compare it with? There's travel and education, is that correct? Okay.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is with regards to, you had mentioned the budgetary pressures of WSIB. That had been something that had been significantly over in previous years for the budgetary estimations. And now I understand it's being accounted for in full-time wages permanent. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So previously what was happening was that we were budgeting everything up in the full-time wages line. Now we are budgeting accurately and putting it down in the WSIB premiums line so that now it's matching where the actual expenses are hitting as well.
Okay, so through you, Your Worship, just to be clear then, the WSIB premiums line as it currently exists is just taking into account those premiums, and then the wage expenses are being separated out into full-time wages. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, so anything that's specifically WSIB related is in the WSIB line.
Okay, and my last question through you, Your Worship. Based on the previous experiences that you've had with the budgetary pressures of the WSIB premiums, do you expect, based on the current forecasting, or account activity, that it will stay within the estimated budget amount?
We are very hopeful, but I will say, and I know that Acting Deputy Chief Murdoch is likely going to want to speak to this because we did discuss this earlier. We are hopeful, but I will say that this continues to be a really ongoing pressure that we're facing. Specifically, I know it's experienced across all the policing agencies, but I will pass that one over to Deputy Murdoch.
Yes, if I could just add a few comments to Scarlett's. I will obviously reiterate what she said in the sense that these are issues that are being faced by police services across the province in regards to frontline responders and the challenges that they are facing. I can let you know some of our numbers, but not specifics maybe in regards to WSIB, but more so in regards to the numbers who are off and away from work. So right now we have 12 officers who are off on long-term absence and 6 officers on short-term absence. We also have a number of civilians who are off on long-term, which would be 7, and 4 civilian staff members off on short-term absence. The other challenge that we do face is that when officers sometimes return to the workplace which is amazing. We've got a great return to work program, through an alternate response unit and other specialty units amongst the station. All of our members are very valuable to our team. However, currently right now we have 17 police officers that would not be considered fully deployable to working a full patrol capacity shift rotation, and 6 sergeants. So again, it's an ongoing issue that we try to balance with other duties throughout our station. And like I said, we've got some great members who have made incredible strides to come back to our organization and be, again, valuable members of our team. And this is something that we really can't predict. We can't predict who will be struggling and who will go off. We obviously are very hopeful that we're going to stay, and we're predicting well and trying to look at some of the risk management in terms of those who are off right now and could return. But again, it is a little bit of an unknown. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Shapes.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on the last statement there in regards to WSIB, and I appreciate the fact you have a good return to work program. I fully understand that considering where I came from and my previous work experience and with a lot of WSIBs and return to work and stress. In regards to the 17 which are undeployable, I believe its term was used, how is that impacting services to the community?
So I know that this was also raised at our last quarterly meeting as well. We were asked whether or not we were still providing effective services. I think that our services we're still meeting our requirements in terms of our dispatch times for priority calls for service 1 through 5 in our communication division there. However, I will say that it has put certain stress on our officers in terms of missing lunches because they're trying to respond to all the calls in a timely fashion and meet those demands. However, right now we haven't necessarily seen any kind of break of service in terms of times of our response or quality. However, it is definitely pressure and stress on our frontline officers.
Okay, thank you, and I can appreciate that.
Okay, Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you. Just a couple of quick questions. One, thank you for the report. It was very detailed and helped a lot with the explanations. I just want to review some of the numbers that you had indicated. So you have 12 officers on long-term disability, 6 officers on short-term disability, 17 officers who are in return to work capacity and really aren't deployable. You had said another number, and that was 6. I missed what the explanation was on the 6.
No problem. And if I could just maybe go back and I'll just clarify. So not long-term disability, just a long-term absence. So I just didn't want to obviously articulate who was long-term disability, who was WSIB, but we do have, a combination thereof within the numbers that I provided. The numbers of 17 officers and 6 sergeants were from the numbers of sworn officers who have returned to work and or who, and that may be from a physical injury or it may be from a mental health injury, who would not be considered through medical documentation that we could deploy them fully to the patrol schedule as well as frontline duties, or either one of the two.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying. So combined with those numbers of the 12, 6, 17, and 6, that's 41 officers that are potentially either can't do their job for various reasons or are in limited capabilities of doing their job. Can I ask how many officers you have? Because I'm counting 41, but if you're at your full complement, what is the full complement of the Kingston Police Force? Not civilians, just police officers.
So our complement is 210, and Scarlett, maybe you could just assist me as to whether or not, I don't believe that number includes the 10 that were hired over a number of years ago due to those officers who were off for reasons including WSIB. So we still do have a complement. We run with, just for frontline purposes, we run with 4 platoons. Each platoon consists of 1 staff sergeant, 3 sergeants, and approximately 18 to 19 sworn officers at this time.
Okay.
We do see a number of vacancies throughout our organization, more so in specialty units. Our community-oriented response and engagement unit is running quite short. Our criminal investigation division, special services division, we just see a number of vacancies across the board, but definitely those vacancies are put towards our frontline officers so we can ensure that we're responding to those emergency calls for service.
Understand. So you're sitting at roughly 19.5 or almost 20% of your workforce that is not really able to work or fully engage in what they're able to do. So you're obviously in a very tough situation. I'll just say this to the officers that are going through this situation. We're here to support, and as a council, and we're obviously here to support the city police in doing the functions that you need to do. It's concerning to hear that you've got almost 20% of your workforce that is not able to engage in, judging by what you had just indicated, a lot of your departments are running very thin, which can create, I won't say safety issues, but issues on all sorts of fronts for any type of engagement for the city. Okay, my last question. Third quarter pressures. So sometimes budgets are weighted equally, and we're looking at second quarter right now, and you indicated third quarter is coming forward. Is your budget weighted? Is it 25, 25, 25, 25? And if it is, knowing that third quarter pressures are coming up, is it something that should be weighted in the future for consideration?
Sorry. I don't think I kind of understand your question.
Okay, so you have, knowing that we have a number of student engagements that are going to be coming up in third quarter, and we're now hovering a little bit below the 50 percentile mark for the second quarter, which means you're kind of on budget, but you've already indicated that you're anticipating a number of large events that the police force is going to be engaged in. So that's going to put third quarter pressures on the budget. Is the budget weighted to indicate that? Meaning, is fourth quarter reduced to include a third quarter weighted budget to accommodate those pressures? If it isn't, fourth quarter and final submission to the council is going to be challenging for your department.
So of the mass gatherings, we've actually had already one of the big events happen. So we've already had the St. Patrick's Day event. So that is out of the budget as well. So we did have a budget added, for 2024, like $500,000, which council knows. So we've already had part of it. So it is weighted in that sense. And although it seems like, so we're sitting at 49.22%, that is year-to-date June surplus of $368,000, which is hopefully we're doing, in my opinion, we are weighting everything else accurately, making sure everything's reflected in the results. Are there pressures? Absolutely, especially with upticks in major crime events and things like that. But I'm very hopeful that if we stick to what we're doing now, I'm very hopeful that we're going to come in on budget or under budget. I'm going to say that.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you all very much. And with that, we will move on in our agenda. So we have no other briefings. Are there any petitions to present? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move to a few special motions. So first, we have a motion of recognition Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Amos, that Kingston City Council recognize August 16th to September 30th as Open Farms Day in the city of Kingston. Open Farms Day is a 6-week celebration of local agriculture and food businesses in Kingston and Frontenac County. Agriculture plays an important role in the community, and a strong agricultural economy is essential for enduring communities, ensuring the health of residents, and establishing support for food security for residents, businesses, and organizations. Addressing food insecurity and sustainability is included as one of Council's 2023 to 2026 strategic priorities, and support for events such as Open Farms Days helps to achieve that priority. Kingston City Council encourages all residents to support local farms and food businesses by participating in the events taking place during Open Farms Days. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that Kingston City Council recognize the career of Bill Hutchins, veteran broadcaster and journalist. Bill's career has spanned 5 decades, including the last 27 years as news anchor at CKWS TV. In addition to his duties behind the desk of the evening news, Bill would often venture into the community to cover stories, especially issues pertaining to City Hall and the City of Kingston. After starting his career in Toronto, Bill moved to Kingston in 1990 to work in the radio industry before joining CKWS as a reporter. Kingston City Council recognizes Bill's numerous contributions to keeping the Kingston community informed on a full range of news, from the ice storm of 1998 to the final Tragically Hip concert in 2016. And then, moved by Mayor Patterson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hassan, that the sincere condolences of Kingston City Council be extended to the family and friends of David Badgie, who passed away on July 31st, 2024. David worked as a transit operator with Kingston Transit since October 18th, 2021. Dave will be remembered by his colleagues for the impact he made on the work environment through his dedication and hard work. Our thoughts are with his colleagues, family, and friends during this difficult time. So with that, we will call the vote on those motions. Okay, and that carries unanimously. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have no deferred motions tonight, so we will move on to reports. First up, we have report number 70 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Stevens, seconded by Councillor Bohm, that report 70 from the CAO consent be received and adopted.
So there are 4 items. Would anyone like any of the items separated? Councillor Glenn?
Yes, I'd like to separate item 2, please.
Number 2 and number 3? Or, okay, so number 2. Okay, so first we will vote, oh, I'm sorry, okay. You're gonna separate number 1 or 4? That's, no, we can. I'm just saying that at that point we'll just go through them one by one.
Yeah, I feel bad now, Your Worship.
Don't feel bad.
Yes, I have one question on number 4.
No worries. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just do them individually. So first, we have request for temporary noise exemption, Queen's University Orientation 2024. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll call the vote. Yeah, we're doing our electronic voting. Just okay. Here we go. Okay, and that carries. Okay, on to item number 2, request for noise exemption, the Frontenac Club. Councillor Glenn.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I pulled this because I thought, given the amount of correspondence that are on both sides of the issue, that it required a little bit of clarification. So really what I wanted to do was just to speak to this from a very practical point of view in terms of why the exemption has moved forward. Unfortunately, the Frontenac Club found itself, I think, in an awkward situation with our noise exemption bylaw. our noise bylaw, hence why they asked for an exemption. The reason that I was willing to entertain this and work with them is because the reality is the Frontenac Club employs a number of people, and their ability to do business impacts those people and their livelihoods. I understand the concerns from citizens, and I've had a number of conversations with them. So I think what we're seeing is some competing needs that are happening over this issue. One of the things, though, that I wanted to make clear that was a misconception was that this was simply and merely being allowed by us. The Frontenac Club is being given an exemption and an opportunity to prove that they can be a good neighbor, that they can be considerate of the people that surround them. So I urge them to continue to do this because an exemption like this can be revoked. And I wanted to make that clear, and I've made that clear with other constituents. So I see that Kyle Campo is on the line. So Acting Director, would you please confirm that yes, this could be revoked if necessary?
Thank you. Through you. Yeah, that would be confirmed, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you. A lot of people have written to me who also, expressed their concern that music was going to be played 46 hours a week. Now, we've heard from the Frontenac Club that this isn't the case, that in order to operate their business, they need some flexibility. So we're granting them the opportunity to prove that they can be good neighbors, that they can be responsible for their actions, and that they can work with the community. I am going to ask the community to please reach out when there is an issue to talk to the owners of the Frontenac Club. They would like to continue to do business within our city, and I think it's important when and where possible to support that. But I also recognize that, noise at inappropriate times can cause a lot of distress for certain people. So please continue as a community to work back and forth on this, and I hope that we will be able to move forward, have a successful business, as well as constituents who can rest easy that there won't be music every single day, every hour of the day. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we'll call the vote on Clause 2. And that carries. Okay, Clause 3, updated municipal capital facility agreement and bylaw, 1300 Bath Road. Okay, we will call the vote. And that carries. Okay, and then Clause 4, Community Investment Fund 2024 funding recommendations. Councillor Chozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Now I feel bad asking, but there we are. The Bloom Skill Center, I know, has got a bit of a grant for a new program at the Via Rail Station. That is so exciting. Do we have an idea of when it's going to be operational so I can go and visit Amber and their wonderful crew?
Thank you. Thank you to you, Mayor Patterson. Great question. We are very excited about this as well. I will have to get back to you on the dates. I know there's some hard work happening behind the scenes to get this up and running, but I will make sure we inform council about opening dates in our council updates.
Thank you. And a shout out to the Bloom Skill Center. Their food is great. Their service is great. Please go visit them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, we will call the vote on Clause 4. And that carries. Okay, on to report number 71 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Boehm, seconded by Councillor Ridge, that report 71 from the CAO recommend be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, so first up, we have a briefing on the community area land needs assessment. And so we will turn it over to Jamie Cook, managing partner from Watson and Associates, Economist Limited, to do that briefing with respect to Clause 2, report number 71.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and members of council, and members of staff, public. It's a real pleasure to be here to be able to present to you the key findings of our Community Area Land Needs and Intensification Report. This report represents a key milestone. It's the second major deliverable from a larger study that's being undertaken by our firm with the city, which is a long-term growth analysis and urban land needs assessment for the city of Kingston. So tonight we're going to focus primarily on the residential land needs for the city, and I'm going to walk you through about a 10-minute presentation to go over the key results of that report. So just in terms of the milestones to date, the study was undertaken, initiated back in the earlier part of 2023, and as of December the 5th, as you recall, I was here in front of council to present the findings of the growth forecast analysis. At that point, we presented the medium growth scenario as a preferred scenario to work forward with as part of our next phase of work, which is looking at the urban land needs assessment for residential, industrial, and commercial retail growth. Prior to that meeting, we did have a public information center that was held in the summer of that year, 2023. And at that point, we met with members of the public to present the findings of the growth forecast. We heard some key considerations on the overall level of growth that was anticipated for the city. And ultimately, that led to further discussions and stakeholder consultation with the Kingston Home Builders Association, as well as members of the city's post-secondary institutions. We spoke with a number of key industries, realtors, and the public. And then in April of 2024, just this previous spring, we held the second PIC, Public Information Center, and that meeting was to discuss the draft findings of our urban land needs assessment. At that time, we spoke to the public and other interested stakeholder groups regarding the key findings of all three of the key studies that you're going to be hearing about in the next month. So at that meeting, we spoke with respect to the community area land needs assessment, again, which is really focusing on the residential and mixed-use areas of the city, the industrial areas, and the commercial areas. And then in July, we released our first main report. In addition to the memo that you received last December, the Community Area Land Needs and Intensification Report was completed for review by council. So as I mentioned, there's three other reports that are underway. There is the Employment Area Land Needs Review that you're going to be hearing about in September. That study focuses on the city's industrial land needs looking out over a 30-year horizon. The next report you'll be hearing about is the Commercial Land Needs Report. That focuses on the city's commercial and retail land needs. That study you'll be hearing about in September at September Council on the 17th. And then there's a final report, which is really going back to the initial work we did back in December to provide more details on the population, housing, and employment report. So it's a more fulsome report just to get into all the sort of details of that study following the memo that was released back in December. And that report will be presented to you on September 19th this year. So I wanted to just get into a little bit of a brief discussion about the city's urban structure before we get into some of the details on the land needs assessment. This is a map that really builds on the Kingston's official plan. If you go to Schedule 2 of the official plan, you'll see some similar nomenclature and some similar sort of foundational policies that ultimately guide how growth is to be directed and how land uses are planned in the city. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just the difference between the urban and the rural areas. Everything inside that red line that you see on the map represents the city's urban lands inside the urban boundary. Everything outside of that line represents the rural area. There's a small portion of lands in Loyalist to the west. And there's also significant areas that are identified in green that are part of the natural heritage system, both within and outside of the city's urban area. So within the urban area, we have what we're calling the community areas and the employment areas. So community areas are essentially where people live and where we have retail jobs, commercial jobs, schools, parks. Essentially, it's the living area, and that living area is broken down into two categories. The first is what we're calling the built-up area. So the province recommends that we identify a intensification area or a built-up area. And so we've done that and labeled that and colored that here in the pink color you see here in the light and dark pink. The light pink area represents the areas more or less stable residential neighborhoods, areas that have been established and built. The dark pink represents key priority intensification areas, which I'm going to speak to in the next slide. This is the key focus for where intensification is being prioritized in the city, where we've seen the most significant levels of intensification and where we expect to see future intensification. I'll speak to this in a bit more detail in the next slide. The other areas you see inside the urban area, in the community area, the areas in beige, and those are what we call the designated growth areas. They used to be the designated greenfield areas, but the province is now calling them the designated growth areas. And within this area, again, we've defined this built-up area and designated growth areas of 2006. So much of this land is already developed in a number of the key residential secondary plan areas like Cataraqui North, Cataraqui West, for example. But there are still some lands that exist within these areas that are either in committed units that are in active applications, units that are pending approval, and there's some additional lands that are still vacant within this area that are identified in the black hatching that can still provide opportunities for growth in these designated greenfield areas. So we're going to get into a bit more of that tonight as I go through the presentation. The other area inside the urban area is the employment area. So these are the areas that are in the dark blue, and these are areas where people work. These are areas that are largely accommodated by industrial development. So this just gives you a bit of an overview of the urban structure of the city and how this study has been essentially organized and how the math sort of falls throughout the report. So as I mentioned, as part of the intensification analysis, we worked with the city as well as Dillon Consulting to identify key priority growth areas. And those key priority growth areas are essentially the city's major arterial roads, including Princess Street, Bath Road, and Gardner's Road. And those major corridors are anchored by three major transit station areas, including the downtown area, the Kingston Center, as well as the Cataraqui Center. So working with the city and Dillon, there was a radius of between 500 and 800 meters that was identified around these major transit station areas. And again, these are the areas, including the strategic growth areas, the corridors that are identified for the priority focus for intensification. You'll also see that there's another key area for focus along Montreal Street, including some additional lands that are captured in the North Kingstown secondary plan area. A lot of that land, or parts of those areas represent areas of the old industrial area that are transitioning from industrial to residential mixed-use environment. So in total, we've identified almost 48,000 potential units that can be accommodated in the city's built-up area, just within these priority strategic growth areas. Dillon's also looked at this in terms of the phasing of development or the timing of potential development, and they've identified about 44% of these lands could be developed in the near term. That would be within the next 10 years or so. In terms of the supply potential, these are lands that are either vacant or highly underutilized, lands that are in active development approvals, or lands that have identified with poor building quality that could be prime areas for redevelopment in the near term. Just want to point out that this number is the supply potential. So it doesn't necessarily represent the demand for intensification within the city over the long term, but it does represent the potential supply opportunities that have been identified over the long term. So outside of these areas, we would still see additional intensification opportunities, but more gentle intensification. In some cases, there could be some further opportunities beyond just gentle intensification, but they would not be the priority areas for intensification going forward. Some of those other areas outside of these priority areas could also include secondary units that would also be accommodated. So looking at the development trends within the city overall, this looks at those major areas that we identified in terms of the land use categories, looking at the greenfield areas, those designated growth areas, the priority intensification areas, and other intensification areas. And you can see that over the last 15 years or so, we've seen a bit of an up and down in the overall rate of growth, but we've seen a steady increase, particularly in the last 7 years with respect to the amount of intensification that the city has accommodated. And a lot of that focus has been in the priority intensification corridor, you can see in the dark pink. When we look over to the right, you can see the percentage of intensification as a share of housing relative to the overall amount of housing in the city. And you can see progressively over that 2006 period, 2010, 11 to 15, and 16 to 23, we've seen a considerable increase in the share of intensification, going from 46% to 59%. So not only have we seen more growth in terms of absolute terms, but we've also seen an increase in the overall percentage of intensification. So going forward, we are recommending an intensification target of 60%. So within that area that we identified in the pink, both the dark and light pink, primarily the dark pink, we've identified 60% of all housing growth will be accommodated in those areas over the next 27 years, from 2024 to 2051. That represents a total of about 14,650 units that would be accommodated within the built-up area over that time period. So it's a much lower number relative to that big number that I mentioned of 48,000 units in terms of supply, but it's a significant amount of growth overall in terms of absolute intensification. It represents about a 50% increase in the overall amount of absolute intensification growth that the city's been experiencing over the last 7 years, which has been a peak period for intensification. And it also represents a 50% increase in the percentage ratio of intensification. The current intensification target is 40%, and we're recommending a target of 60%. So on the other side, we have the designated greenfield areas, or the designated growth areas, and that represents the other 40% of growth. And you can see that the main difference between these two areas is that the built-up area is the focus of mostly high-density development. About 76% of the development is in high-density categories, whereas in the designated greenfield areas, we're anticipating a much broader mix of housing, a much higher share of housing oriented towards low-density and medium-density or grade-related housing forms and less in high-density forms. But we still anticipate some mix of high-density to provide for complete communities and a range of housing in the greenfield areas. And we think this is the right balance of growth between the built-up area and the designated greenfield area, and for a few reasons. The first is that we've obviously seen more development occurring in the built-up area over the last 15 years or so, particularly in that last 6 or 7 year period that I showed you. But we also recognize that the city's growing at a much faster rate, which you heard from me back in December. And it's growing because of demand really coming from all spectrums of the demographic structure within the city. So all age groups is another way to put that. And so in order to accommodate all age groups, which includes young urban professionals, including students and younger people in that sort of typically single category, to also accommodating a greater share of families and growing families with children, as well as empty nesters and seniors. Looking at that broad spectrum, you really do need a broad range of housing types across all housing structure types and tenures. So we need low density, we need medium density and high density. We also need ownership housing, and we need rental housing to accommodate the significant growth that we're anticipating. So we know that there's a limited supply of designated greenfield areas within the city, and with additional growth will be more demand for that. We can't accommodate those grade-related housing opportunities in the built-up area to the extent that we need to. So we need to look to other areas in the DGA and potentially beyond the city's current urban boundary to accommodate that growth. And then lastly, I just want to mention that there's also a small percentage of growth that's identified to the rural area in North Kingston. It represents about 2% of the overall forecast for housing growth. So looking at the overall community area land needs, so again, this is the residential areas that we identified in the beige. We have a total supply of about 2,040 units that are currently available in applications that are essentially in inactive development planning approvals. You can see that a large share of that development is in the high-density category, about 825 units of that 2,040 units. When we compare that to the demand, as I showed you earlier, there's a bit of a mismatch. So we have about 17% of the demand identified in the greenfield area for high density, but over 40% of the supply in high density. So we have a limited amount of active developments in the greenfield areas to accommodate grade-related housing. We also have about 73 developable hectares of land also identified in the greenfield areas that I mentioned. So these are lands that are not in active plans, they can accommodate growth. So they also contribute to the supply for residential development going forward, but it is relatively minimal at 73 hectares. So this table just provides the math for those who want to really understand how this math works between the supply and the demand for housing. So as we noted, the greenfield forecast is about 9,500, call it 9,600 rounded units overall. We're then comparing that to about just under 2,040 housing units in the development approvals process. That gives us a shortfall of just over 7,500 units that can't be accommodated within the designated greenfield area. At a density of 18 units per gross hectare, that generates an overall deficit of land of 416 hectares. Now, I just also want to point out that the 18 units per gross hectare has been factored up for not only the density of the residential units themselves, but also the lands that are required to accommodate other land uses within the community area, which is why we call it community area, because we're not just accommodating housing in that area, we're accommodating additional non-residential uses like schools, other retail and commercial uses. We're accommodating parks. We're also accommodating infrastructure like stormwater and roads. So all these uses also have to be accommodated in that community area. And that represents an additional adjustment for land requirement of about 50%. So essentially what that does is it lowers the overall density by half. So when we compare the overall need for land to the supply, we get about 416 hectares that were short. We also have that 73 hectares that identified that are not in active development applications, and that ultimately gives us an overall net deficit or shortfall of 340 hectares of land that are required. So these are the additional lands that are required to be accommodated outside of the city's current urban area for community area development. So to summarize, we've looked at all of the lands that are active as well as vacant lands within the city. We've identified that there is a shortfall of land to accommodate all housing types in the designated greenfield area, in particularly low and medium density housing. We've identified a gross up factor of approximately 50% to account for additional lands within the community area that I mentioned. Again, lands like parks and roads, for example, and other non-residential uses. I also want to point out that the focus of our work at this point is to look at the quantum and examine the quantum or the overall amount of residential lands and community area lands that are needed. We're not looking at this point in time, the location of where those potential expansion opportunities may exist. That is something that will be explored by the city as part of their official plan review. And it's also to note that the actual amount of land needs that have been identified through our report could vary once the city does undertake its official plan review. Whenever we go from a study where we're looking at lands through a desktop review and through a process like this versus looking at lands that are required on the ground when we're actually delineating areas on the ground, we need to consider things like discernible edges. We want to make sure that we are properly, we're not cutting a rural parcel potentially maybe in half. We want to look at areas where it makes sense to ultimately draw boundaries for an urban versus rural land use designation. So for those reasons, there could be some differences that ultimately are identified through the official plan review work when it comes to the overall land requirements. So in terms of next steps, the next step, as I mentioned, will be to present the Employment Lands Review Report then followed by the commercial lands review report and the population, housing and employment growth analysis study. So this is all coming to you in September. You're going to have a lot of reading. I apologize. But it's been a really interesting study, really rewarding study, and I hope that you find it useful as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the council for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Councillor Shapes?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm not looking forward to the report in September. Just my love of reading, but I will read it. Within your report, there was a definition of complete communities. I like the concept. I think we could do even better, such as maybe complete neighborhoods. I presented that forward to staff, where residents could actually walk to basic services, like if they needed to purchase a bag of milk, they could actually walk to a corner store within the neighborhood, not having to drive, especially in the West End. Maybe that's more concept, more central Kingston, but just wondering if something that you may be thinking about, maybe including in your future reports.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's definitely something that we've identified in the report. It builds on the broad policies that the province lays out in the provincial policy statement or planning statement, and building on the city's own official plan policies. And so we are definitely trying to encourage a broad mix of uses between residential and non-residential, and a broad mix of non-residential uses within all of our communities, including the built-up area and established and new communities in the designated growth areas, and having a healthy balance between those uses, and obviously looking at densities that are, as you've noted, encourage more walkability and healthy communities. And so that is something we've mentioned in the report. We've looked at, in the case of greenfield densities that are higher than what are currently exist today. There's also densities that are established in the report for the built-up area as well that encourage some of these merits and goals with respect to complete communities and more denser communities.
Okay, thank you. I think it would also help with sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Senek.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Cook, for your presentation. In terms of looking at our current urban area, did you try to get some sort of model where you didn't need an urban boundary expansion, like you actually tried to fit all the units within the current urban boundary, or did you make the assumption that where, that 60-40 split you were talking about, that 60% will be in the urban area, but 40% has to be new greenfield sites outside the urban boundary? Did you try to get at least a split of, 80%, 20%, or 90%, 10%? How did that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a great question. We did definitely, it is an iterative process. We did go back and forth in our own modeling and working with the city to look at what we thought was an optimal target for intensification. And ultimately, we did not feel the need to release multiple scenarios. We really wanted to work with a scenario that we thought was the best scenario to move forward with, the most appropriate scenario. I find, like, at this point in my career, I think it's really important to look at different scenarios and test them, but to just test a scenario for testing's sake, it can be misleading, and if it's not a scenario that we feel comfortable defending and moving forward with, it would be something that I would want to put in the report. So we did look at higher intensification percentages, and we looked at lower intensification percentages. But the real challenge with that was that what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at how much growth is coming to the city over the next 30 years to 2051. We got 27 years left in this horizon. So who's coming? How much first, and then who's coming? So why are we growing faster? And we talked a bit about this last December. We're really growing faster because of more interprovincial migration, and we're seeing migration from largely from areas in the large urban centers of the GTA, and it's focused primarily in the working age groups. There's younger urban professionals, and then there's a bulk of new people coming that are in that 30 to 54 age group, and there's some that are coming in the 55 plus. But in order to align the population growth and those that are already living here today, we need to make sure we have a balance of housing types to accommodate those individuals. And we know that things are changing with respect to affordability and preferences in urban living and all those things, but we do also anticipate that there still will be demand for a portion of the housing to be grade related. So we are seeing that shift, but if we shift the focus further towards intensification, because the built-up area can accommodate a lot of grade-related housing, it forces us to shift that mix of housing further and further to high density. We don't think that going any further to respect to the high density forecast, which is 50% higher than what you've already achieved during your peak period in the last 6 years, we didn't think that was appropriate. So that's really where we sort of came to that sweet spot, if you will, of 60% intensification.
Thank you. Another question I have is, there's some spots within the city that have no development right now, that are just big vacant lots, like up Montreal Street. We have the former CP train station, like even on Coverdale Drive in Bay Ridge, there's this big vacant lot that's been vacant for 10 years. Are you working with the city for ideas of, because that's within the urban boundary that we have, are you working with city staff as to how to encourage whoever owns those sites to develop them right now? I could go on and on. There's like 12 sites at least I can say off the top of my head that are vacant, been vacant a long time. Within the urban boundary, that would be great to get some buildings on.
Yeah, it's a great question. We also had some feedback as well at the public meeting about the amount of surplus federal lands and provincial lands. Some of those lands that you're mentioning might fall into that category. I'm not sure how many. Part of the challenge with that is it's an opportunity and a challenge. So you have these lands that are vacant and represents an opportunity, maybe medium term or long term. But in the near term, there's some challenges with some of these sites. One is that they're not in our priority intensification areas, so they're not well served by transit. They're not necessarily, they haven't been the focus historically of considerable redevelopment or intensification in terms of market demand. And the biggest challenge is that many of these lands are not within the ownership of the city or the private sector. And so there's a considerable amount of uncertainty about how and when these lands are ultimately going to be, the custodianship of these lands is going to be turned over to the city or the private sector to consider how these lands are going to be developed over time. And the challenge that we have right now with the city is that you have about between 5 and 10 years of supply of greenfield lands. The development community would argue less, but I would say somewhere between 5 and 10 years of supply, maybe closer to 5, to accommodate grade-related housing in your designated greenfield areas. The amount of time it takes to go from doing these studies to ultimately the additional planning work and then looking at servicing, marketing, the financing, ultimately construction and occupancy, it usually takes up to about 10 to 15 years to go from what we're doing now to seeing an occupied unit. So the challenge with some of those lands is that there's a lot of uncertainty. They need to be studied. They'll take time. So we would encourage the city to continue to look at those lands, partner with the various levels of government that are needed to explore opportunities. But those lands are likely going to be medium to long term. And they're also not necessarily within areas where that's identified for the focus of intensification. So because of that, they also need to be studied in terms of what implications that's going to have with respect to traffic and other impacts that could be caused by, and obviously servicing requirements that could be caused by significant increases in the amount of density in those areas that previously wasn't planned for.
Thank you. My last question is about the maps, the urban boundary expansion requests in Exhibit D. And I don't know, do you want me to wait to ask them directly to staff, or have you been involved with the expansion requests that the city has received?
I haven't been personally involved with the expansion request, so that may be a question more directed to staff.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Ridge.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this report. It was great reading, actually. Really enjoyed it. I want to focus on one specific item in the report That's the net migration forecast, which you've already touched on a little bit. So under the annual average from 2006 to 2021, and also the annual average from 2021 to 2051, young people have made the largest demographic. And I mean, well, in the first category, it's 0 and 19, and 20 to 34 are both 420 out of a possible 1,040. But then when you look at 2021 to 2051, it's 1,010 for the 20 to 34 category, and the actual amount has more than doubled in terms of that. Is it safe to say that that young population, is that just students? Are students taken into account there, or is it just young people in general, just for clarification purposes?
So within that migration data, with respect to students, it would only include non-permanent residents, which are primarily your international students. They, for whatever reason, StatsCan includes them into the permanent population. But all other students are then not included, and they'd be layered on top because they are getting counted somewhere else in the province during census enumeration. So if I live in Toronto and I go to Queens, I should be getting picked up in Toronto. It can be a bit messy, but that's ultimately how it's done. So it's largely permanent, the population that's permanent that's driving that, and it's primarily intra-provincial migration from other parts of Ontario, largely the Greater Toronto area, that's driving that.
Okay, so just a follow-up question through you, Your Worship. Okay, so we have a 15-year period where it's 1,040 positive net migration, and now we're going to 2,170, and the majority of that is young people. So, okay, I think that makes it really clear where our priorities should be in terms of looking at what populations need assistance the most with regards to housing. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, a little bit of a left field question, because I obviously expanding the urban boundary is challenging given its impact on the environment, and I'm not a fan of sprawl. Do we have an idea, and if this is beyond the scope of something you've researched, I'm curious how rapidly other major urban areas in Ontario are expanding? I'm curious, like, are there any comparators to what we're proposing to do, which in the next 20 years versus like Guelph or Ottawa or some other urban centers? Do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, I've got a pretty good handle on it. Do a lot of work across Ontario, and it really ranges. So in some places, municipalities have fixed boundaries, and they can't expand without annexing their neighboring municipalities. So you don't have that challenge, but places like Guelph do. So Guelph, we worked on their municipal comprehensive review and OP review. They're not expanding their boundary. At some point, they'll probably have to enter into discussions on annexing, likely to the south. Other areas we worked in, like in Waterloo region, we had a fairly modest amount of land that we identified, probably just a couple hundred hectares overall for the whole area of Waterloo, which is pretty modest. The province came back and said, no, we don't agree with that. They expanded that number quite significantly through their review. Other areas on the other sort of flip side of that would be areas like Peel, where you have a very large municipality, very fast growing, and you have two municipalities that can't expand their boundaries anymore, being Mississauga and Brampton. So it's created a significant amount of challenges in Caledon. They're expanding their boundary by about 4,000 hectares, give or take. About over 2,000 hectares of that is in the community area category, so the residential category. So that's probably the biggest urban boundary expansion I've seen in my career, probably something like that. A big one was also in Barrie a few years ago. That was actually through an annexation, so they couldn't expand either. So there was a study done where the province got involved and said, we're going to look at annexing lands to the south, and that was about a 2,000 hectare expansion in Barrie. So Barrie would be a good example for Kingston because you're a little more comparable. They're smaller than you, but not by a lot. And so 340 hectares is still a significant amount of land, but it's obviously not nearly as big as some of those big numbers I mentioned, but it's still a significant amount of land, I think, that will be more than sufficient to, I think, to accommodate growth for quite some time.
Have you ever done a comparator or reporting? I always like to compare. I always enjoy comparing. Have you ever done a comparative analysis on the amount of growth going on in Ontario and what other municipalities are doing? Because this was a very, and again, I echo Councillor Ridge, this was a very thorough report on Kingston. Do you have any a comparative analysis on what other municipalities are doing to deal with their growth challenges? I assume it's a mix of intensification and growth expansion as well. Is that a fair assessment of what other cities are doing?
Yeah, I would say that most municipalities, if they have the ability to, if they're not constrained because of limits to their ability to expand their boundary, because many municipalities, or some anyway, are hemmed in because they are surrounded by other municipalities where there's no rural land to expand into. So, and some may have issues with water, wastewater supply. They may have assimilative capacity issues, like Orangeville, for example, can't grow because they don't have land and they don't have servicing. So they've got to look to a number of strategic approaches to growth. So municipalities that are constrained may they're not going to see the level of growth rate, and they're not going to see the diversity of housing because they just are limited in terms of what they can accommodate. But most municipalities that are growing at a healthy rate, and I would say you're in that healthy rate of growth. The provincial growth rate is about 1.5%, so you're still not in the fastest growing area, or even the average growth rate area of the province. You're at a slightly lower growth percentage. A lot of that has to do with the fact that some of the major urban centers, like in the GTA and Ottawa, are growing faster. But the point is that if you're growing relatively steady or fast, then that's because of largely more migration. In the big urban centers, it's a combination of international migration and maybe interprovincial migration, mostly international, larger centers. And in the medium-sized cities all across Ontario, we're seeing more interprovincial migration because things have, and we're going to talk about this a bit more in September, but we've seen significant changes in the economic climate in Eastern Ontario and Southwestern Ontario. We're seeing changes in the way people work. We're seeing changes in affordability of housing, and all these things are driving more. And we're seeing a federal immigration policies that are much more aggressive on the international level, which is putting more pressure on outward migration with respect to interprovincial migration. So, as a result, you're seeing more growth pressure, again, largely because of that pressure for younger urban professionals, families and growing families, and to a lesser extent, empty nesters and seniors. And as a result, it's putting more pressure on a greater variety of housing that's needed to accommodate that growth. So I could definitely, it's an interesting thought about putting some statistics together to sort of document how that's happening across Ontario, but I think I would say overall you're fairly comparable to other municipalities that I've worked in that are facing similar growth pressures.
Okay, Councillor Ostroff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. Thanks for the report. It's obviously really, really well done work and analysis, and it's exciting to look at. I represent the rural area of the city, and I'm not sure if I'm reading it all right, but at 2%, 370 homes. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and what you might see? We have done past work on hamlet development, and in my areas that I'm focused on, we have probably half a dozen opportunities for some sustainable small subdivisions, one a little bit larger to the east side, and that I would like to see supported eventually, because I believe that we meet a lot of the goals that we have as a city for sustainability. I mean, our water doesn't go into the river, There's got to be more ways to recognize the positive impact of the rural area in meeting some of the housing needs. Now, I don't want it to be flooded, but I do want to give some opportunities where it can be. And what did you foresee even with the 2%, and how can we speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So first I would just say that So there's more to come. It probably won't be enough to really satisfy, I think, what you're looking for, but there is a further breakdown of the growth by sub-area, which will include a bit more details on the pace of population housing growth in the rural area and the other sub-areas. But I think it's important to note that the focus of this work has really been primarily concentrated on the urban system. So the main objective of this work is to identify how much land is required in the urban area to support the majority of population growth. And that's the focus. It's also typically where the details are laid out by the province in terms of how we focus these land needs assessments. And then further, the province, through their provincial planning statement, provides a hierarchy for population and urban development or urban settlement areas, and focuses that growth to be in fully serviced settlement areas. So through looking through this through a provincial policy framework, through a local policy framework, and also through the guidance that's provided to us in terms of how to do these assessments, the focus really has been on the urban system, but I would definitely echo, that the rural area is important. It's important because it provides, clusters of economic opportunity that are important to the surrounding rural community and the urban area. And it's something that can definitely be looked at further, building on the work that's been done through this work. So through the official plan review, there's nothing preventing the city to look further at developing additional policies or revising policies in the rural area as appropriate, as they fit within the framework of the provincial planning statement and their local context. So I think I would leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to the opportunity of having even discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. Just a quick comment about Figure 5 and piggybacking a little bit on Councillor Ridge's comments. You had indicated that you're expecting to see the biggest growth in the 20 to 34 age category. And my comment would be that Kingston continually, for as long as I can recall, but I'll just say for continually the last 10 years, has been a top 2 retirement destination for seniors, 60 plus, on a continual basis. There's another organization I work for that can verify that. So there's fact check. So I guess I would question a little bit of the weighted scale that you're showing here, in that I believe you're going to see more retirees come to Kingston. We are a desirable destination. Stats Canada can prove this number, that we are a good location. We're central to 3 major cities, and like I said, I think your weighted scale is a little bit off in regards to that, and that's my only comment. The report was good, was enjoyable to read. This was the only area that I raised my eyebrows going, I think that's a little bit off, but my 2 cents.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could maybe just respond briefly. I think it's a good point. It's always very difficult to try to obviously project long-term and get into this level of granularity. I think a couple things I would point out, that it's important to look at the percentages and the absolute numbers, because there's so much additional migration coming to Kingston, and the absolute numbers are so much larger in the younger age groups, it kind of dwarfs the percentages in the other age groups that aren't necessarily getting the biggest bump relative to historical trends. So on an absolute basis, you're still getting a little bit more migration in those categories than you have historically, but the percentages are maybe not as high because of that younger age group that's sort of dominating that. And I would say that I don't disagree. I think Kingston's a very attractive place to empty nesters and retirees. And there's a lot of areas in Ontario also that are. But we typically don't see the bulk of the migration, surprisingly, being concentrated in those age groups. It's typically in the younger age groups and the working age groups where we see the bulk of the migration. And it's also important to keep in mind that there's a strategic sort of goal to ultimately accommodating more of that migration in that younger working age population, because you need labor and you need people to ultimately service those retirees that are here now and that are coming. And the other point I want to just raise is that even though you're not seeing a major spike in the overall rate of migration in the 55 or 65 plus age group, The 65-plus age group is growing at double the pace in Kingston right now relative to the rest of the population. So you're going to see significant seniors in Kingston even without migration. So that's another thing to just keep in mind in terms of how you're managing growth and managing population change, and ultimately how that impacts labor and employment ratios and things like that.
Commissioner Agnew?
Thank you, and through you, just additional comments there for Councillor Amos. There's no doubt that we have an aging population, and we're aware of that, and there's a lot of, when we roll into more detailed policy work for the official plan, these are the high-level inputs that we then take as staff, and then we figure out how to action and create the appropriate policies, where there's a lot of cross-collaboration with Commissioner Campbell, with the housing group, with looking at long-term care, Rideau Crest. So we're preparing strategies on the housing side to address the aging population. There will be some very intentional work around that and some intentional engagement through the official plan that will address some of those issues, building upon some of the comments that certainly Mr. Cook has provided, but acknowledging what you're talking about for sure.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Agnew. And I guess that's kind of what I was trying to get at in a roundabout way, is that, yes, I want to recognize that we do have a large older adult population here, but we also have an older adult population that wants to downsize from a 3-4 bedroom home to potentially a condo or an apartment, and that's not available to them right now. So that's part of the intensification that needs to happen, but it also as a policy fact for that older adult population. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, Mr. Cook, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, it is 9:20, so I propose we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 9:30. We have a long way to go, so take a 10-minute break and then we'll get right back to it. Thank you. Okay, folks, it is 9:30. So I'm going to ask council if they can please return to their seats. Okay. Okay, folks, so we will this is the first time I'm seriously thinking about using my gavel. Okay, folks, so as mentioned, we have a significant amount of work ahead of us. My preference is to try to get through our agenda tonight, but if we get late and we are nowhere near the end, then my intention is to recess and bring us back here tomorrow evening. So it really is in some sense up to council about how we want to manage that. So with that, we will move to clause 2 of report number 71. That is the community area land needs assessment. Any comments or discussion? Councillor Senek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I have some questions about Exhibit D and the urban boundary expansion requests. So I just wondered, like, we have the maps showing where the requests from the request for information, I can't remember what we called it, RFQ, RFP, that was, the deadline was January 31st. Are these now going forward, or is there still going to be selection? So I'm looking at like the key map, Exhibit D, and there's like map 1, the key map, and then there's a blow up for map 1, 2, 3, 4. Are we going ahead with those, or are we still in negotiation? How does that work?
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you. So we have Ms. Agarwal with us, who's been leading this process as the manager of policy planning, and her team has been meeting with each of the NOI applicants, giving them a set of almost like pre-application comments, and what flows from there is the need for each of those individual property owners to file a site-specific official plan amendment application with all of the technical information that would support the appropriateness of why that land should be brought into the boundary in consideration of all of the different things that we've been talking about in this process to date. So those applications, we've asked the NOI applicants to have those in by the end of October, and then staff starts the process of technical review associated with each of those, and that becomes part of the draft of the official plan that eventually will make it to the public and council for feedback. So we're midway through the process. Property owners have been given some high-level commentary. They're working on their individual applications. They have until the end of October to file those. We've given them some extra time on certain elements of their technical studies that we don't need immediately. The most important thing we need right up front is water and wastewater information so that it can go into the wastewater master plan that's going to be starting early in 2025. So there's no certainty. We're doing the application process as we stated. It's in that process of preparation right now, and those have yet to be filed, and then we review them methodically as part of the overall official plan process, and then we report out to that in terms of drafts and looking for public feedback and feedback from council.
Thank you. And then further to that, like, what environmental considerations, like, are they going to be submitting also environmental impact studies? Because I'm looking at 3279 Creekford Road and 3125 Creekford Road, and their land, you know, like, we don't know if they're developing their entire block, but the bottom portion of both blocks are right in the Collins Creek wetland complex.
I think, go ahead, Ms. Agarwal.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Rosanek, yes, they have been asked to provide an environmental impact statement. The deadline for that has been extended to the spring of next year, given that they have to complete some seasonal work in the spring. But not just for these properties, but for all of the properties that have, that that are contemplating submitting an official plan amendment for an urban boundary expansion, and environmental impact study has been indicated as a required study.
Thank you. And this is a question that kind of goes on to what Councillor Shaves was asking Mr. Cook. Also, as part of the evaluation of each site, is there going to be criteria that will consider like how far away these sites are in terms of, having to be dependent on a car and creating greenhouse gas emissions? Can they be, are they walkable to a food store, workspace, schools, places of worship, recreational arenas, bus services? Or is it going to be like all our other green fields and, eventually, it will be built up and transit will reach it. And, you can go to the Loblaws over on Midland Avenue. Like, how will that factor in?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. We have had the conversations with these applicants, and we've been encouraging them to include a mix of uses, including commercial uses, and if the property is large enough to identify, for example, a school block, and also areas for parks and open spaces. So we are trying our best to create complete communities, but that information is yet to be seen when we receive the actual official plan amendment applications.
I see. Okay, thank you. Your worship, I can't, I want to try an amendment with the recommendation tonight. I'm worried about the word endorse because that basically means we support, we've probably have recalled current reports, like even one earlier tonight, where staff's reports say, as you know, council endorsed, and it just builds on, and it doesn't really allow, with that type of wording, to go back and, and I don't know, get a second chance or a second sober thought or to change the course of the direction. And so I want to say for tonight's report, instead of endorsing their, whatever we're calling this, the community area lands needs and intensification analysis, I want to propose that instead we use the word receive.
Okay, is that, so I'm just looking at the,
Yeah.
so maybe I'm looking at the amendment, there's more to it?
Yeah,
So-
I'll go on. Is
Sure,
that okay?
yeah, go on.
Yeah. So that's the first part of the amendment. And then the second part is that, I have no problem intensifying within the urban boundary, but because there's so many unknown factors right now, if we really are going to be getting this explosive growth, we're going to be seeing a new federal government, or at least a new federal election in the next 2 years, maybe next year even. We're also going to be getting a provincial election in 2 years' time, and who knows, what will happen there if there's change of policies. The second part, and we can separate the clauses, vote on them separate, but the second part of the amendment I'm looking for is that we hold off for 3 years until we know more about the accuracy of the population projections in terms of, expanding the urban growth boundary.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. Is there a seconder for this? Okay. Councillor Shaves, you're going to second this? Okay. So the amendment is on the floor. Councillor Sanik, you've already sort of given some rationale for it, but once the amendment is introduced, I do restart the clock. So if there's anything else you want to say to the amendment, you can, and then we'll open up the floor to comments.
Sure. I do think we have, thank you, Your Worship, I do think we have a lot of lands that will still come through planning committee, as new, within the urban growth boundary, as new applications. We have, like I said before, the CP former railway out Montreal Street, which is on an express bus route. We have lands like at Centennial Drive and Malabar. We've approved so many things at Planning Committee that now we're waiting to, for the development to occur. We have Outer Princess Street west of Bay Ridge Drive, where all the trees have been cleared and land from some landowners, like they're buying up the homes, so we're going to be seeing those development applications come through. And that's all within the urban growth boundary. And I think it'll be, doing a disservice to those developers that are trying to work within the urban growth boundary if then we say, okay, we're going to expand the urban growth boundary and make it easier for developers just to, go into greenfields. We all know that it's way easier to buy greenfields, clear all the trees where they just have to pay a nominal fee with our current tree bylaw. Instead of working within the lands that are within the urban growth boundary, within our city limits right now, that really need to be developed. We need to give incentive to the developers to use the available lands within our urban growth boundary that we have right now. So that's my justification for these amendments. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll open it up to discussion on the amendment. Councillor Bohm.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I could have supported the first part, changing endorse to receive. I don't really see that as that big a deal. I wholeheartedly cannot support the second part. Reason being, we're just back in this same conversation, can't build up, can't build out, where do we put the people exactly? That's like saying this whole approach of let's wait 3 years. That's going to be the wait and see approach. That's what we've been doing, study after study after study. It's why we currently have the housing supply issue that we have. So here's an attempt to try to be proactive. Here's an attempt to plan ahead. We've now got a consultant. We've got oodles and oodles of paperwork and studies and everything that say people are coming. They're already here. There's people that can't find somewhere to live. Like the problem's already here. It's not going away. It's going to get worse. So saying let's wait another 3 years until they come, that's like saying let's wait until the flood's about to hit and then we'll start to build the dam. It's too late at that point. You're out of time. So I know there'll be people shaking their heads, and it's a privilege to be able to sit and rent an apartment and say, well, you know what, I don't want to lose my skyline. It's a privilege to own a home and be able to come here and say, let's not build any more houses. It's a privilege that a lot of people, more and more, young families and seniors don't have. They don't have anywhere to rent. They don't have anywhere to buy a house. We need all types of housing. We need it faster than we can build it. There's construction constraints. We're about to enter a trade shortage, the likes of which we have never experienced in this country. It is going to get worse. We may say, here's the land to build the houses, finally. For once in this city, we may say that. And we don't have enough people to even build them. So, let's stop wasting everybody's time at the end of the day. We need more houses. I'm going to say it as bluntly as possible. We've studied everything to death. We've done it for the 10 plus years that I've been on council. There's a small group of people in this city that seem to be opposed to any type of change. And I'm glad they exist. I was glad they existed with the third crossing because they help us vet things. But it doesn't mean they're always right. I'm not saying we're always right, but it doesn't mean they're always right. That's why we have consultants. That's why we have all these other people that come in. Every municipality in Ontario, every municipality in Canada right now is facing housing supply issues. It's a good thing we're growing. Now let's find somewhere for people to live and get them out of tent encampments and sleeping cabins. That's part of our job, is to build houses. So let's approve the studies and let's start moving forward on that. So I cannot support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, I'll be brief. I don't know in 3 years what major thing is going to happen. We could get a different government. We could get census, another half census coming up in 2026. Maybe that might be out. We're growing at a fast rate. I want to echo Councillor Bohm. I completely agree with him. Putting a pause on this. Keep in mind, we're not agreeing to expanding the urban boundary tonight. We're going to be coming back and figuring out where and what we're going to be doing. So because we're not making a decision tonight, this is to me directing staff to ignore something for 3 years. I'm not going to support this. Again, we have to be forward thinking, and I've really liked that about this council. Let's try to be forward thinking and predict where we're going to be in 27 years. So I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Glenn.
Thank you, and through you. So a question, with the amendments, if this was to go forward, what impact would this have on the official planning process?
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you. Essentially, it would delay the completion of the project by 3 years.
Okay. So I think Councillor Osanek's been very clear about some of her concerns. So is there any way to give greater consideration for better densification and the environmental concerns that she's expressed?
Commissioner Agnew.
I would say that if we go back to the report that we brought in May, where council endorsed the high-level principles, I think those are laid out pretty clearly for us in the way that some of the conversation around environment, carbon, tree retention. I think we have pretty clear direction on this. This is really about the methodology of calculating the amount of land we need, how we choose to distribute it, how we choose to bring on new land, what gets built there. Those are all detailed conversations that are going to unfold over the next couple of years. But we have to start with an understanding of overall need from an inventory perspective of land so that we can start to work the problem, and then we can work it as strategically and as aligned with council's priorities and those critical elements that were endorsed through that original report, so that we bring you back something that's a reflection of what you asked us to do. But we have to be able to start that process. We did agree to a very aggressive schedule to try to complete the official plan within this term of council, and we want to be able to deliver that. But if we have delays in when we have the critical inputs into the process, it fundamentally affects our ability to finish the work on time, and puts us behind where I think council would like us to be based on our previous direction.
Okay, thank you. So if we do endorse, receive, accept this report, does that mean that we are married to using everything in it, or as we move forward with the official plan, can we bring other considerations to the table and modify that plan?
Thank you, and through you. Certainly, once we issue a draft, our draft would be, the whole point is there will be robust public consultation and consultation with council around the contents of that, what we've put forward in terms of some initial ideas, the hierarchy of land policies. So there's an opportunity, lots of opportunity to reflect, but we need to be able to have the inputs to come up with something to present to you. I think that that can unfold through the process. Tonight's decision doesn't marry you to anything, but it gives us at least a basis to start the work, to start to develop the plan, and to start to put together an overall thought of how it's going to go into some of the other master planning exercises as well. When we start to look at land inventory, you're going to receive a lot of information in September. Mr. Cook spoke to it tonight. Within the next month, you're going to receive a separate study on the employment lands, another one to do with the commercial land, and the most important one that I think is of great interest to this group is going to come on October 1st. It'll go to Planning Committee first on, I believe, September 18th, and that is the growth allocation. So that looks at the amount of growth that we need, and it starts to spatially allocate it across the city, which is another critical part when we start to look at how we accommodate what we need over the long term, where it goes, what's the phasing of that. So the other thing I would say about any type of urban boundary expansion is the city is in control about how quickly we bring on that land. So when we talk about an urban boundary expansion, it doesn't mean that we finish the plan and all of a sudden we have 340 hectares of land that's immediately within the boundary and with the expectation of it developing.
It will have to be done in a very strategic and phased way based on a lot of considerations. A, what's needed at the time from an inventory perspective. B, what we have available from a staff resource perspective with respect to servicing the lands and making them development ready. Those are multi-year processes and they're expensive. We have to figure out as a municipality how we're going to finance it. So there's lots of detailed work that will come through this process, and there will be a lot of decision points through this council. This is really just giving us the basis to start to develop some of that to bring back to you. So I'm hoping that gives you some comfort tonight. Certainly there will be lots of conversations through the process. I know this is a delicate conversation, but we really have to get started to be able to deliver the plan and the timing that we presented to you in May.
Okay, thank you for that. So apparently it wanted to cut me off. So with regards to the amendment, I would be happy to support the receives piece. I am deeply concerned about delaying the process of planning because of the impending housing needs. So that's given me some comfort that we can make sure to give consideration for the environmental concerns and have future discussions with regards to how we expand, if we expand. So I'm going to respectfully not vote for the amendment, but I do appreciate the level of concern. And I think we need to keep that top of mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sheaves.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Just listening to the previous conversation, and trying to remember if we did or not. Did we approve the official plan a few councils ago? Or was it something else?
Ms. Agarwal?
The previous official plan update was approved in 2017.
Okay, because I
So-
thought there was something else that came through council. If this was approved, would it delay development of residential units? Because further on in this agenda, we're approving or looking to approve a development of 25 stories. So would this type of development be stopped if this motion passed?
Councillor Sheaves, I'm not sure that staff understand that question.
Well, I think there's a concern with there won't be any development and we'll be further behind in our residential units and in densification. But there are developments going through planning and coming to council, with tonight being one which is 25 stories. So will this put a stop to that since our OP hasn't been approved, or will this be able to still be completed within the urban boundary?
Okay, so see Mr. Park and then see Hurdle. Mr. Park? Or see Hurdle? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So this would not prevent current planning applications from proceeding and being approved and moving to construction. The work that we're trying to move ahead is not work to plan for the next 3 to 4 years. This is long-term planning. So if we don't proceed with long-term planning, a future council, most likely, will be in a situation where they will be pressured with no land left, nowhere to put housing, because planning that was done previously was based on short-term and not longer term. So this is really about looking for the planning of the long term and the population growth, not only that we are experiencing now, but that will be continuing over many years to come.
Okay, I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Ostroff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. And yeah, I won't support this amendment, though I really do want to say I have a lot of respect for her intentions. And I do believe that we have heard through our staff that there's a lot of recognition of the delicate conversations that we have to have in recognizing our environment. And I think that this is the time the time is now to give this the support, to do the deep dive, to do the hard work, to plan for the future. And and I think we have an incredible responsibility to do that. So I appreciate my colleagues' questions, Councillor Bohm and Councillor Glenn, because we do need to ask those hard questions and have the courage to move forward, trusting in the process, trusting in the things that we value as a council, and that's been really, really clear. And I think we can accomplish both, and for the good of the future. So I think we need to move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nanny.
Yeah, so I'll just be brief. So I wouldn't want to hinder or delay the process of the official plan update, and I really worry that this would put us in a really difficult situation in the future. So I can't support this. I'm sorry.
Okay. Councillor Sanik, you have the last word. Is there anything else you want to say?
I just wanted to ask if we could just still separate receive from the other one. Thank you.
So I think just for the benefit of the council, can I just ask staff a question? Is there any operational effect of changing endorse to receive? Commissioner Agnew.
Yeah, thank you, and through you. Endorse for us is a stronger connotation, but certainly as long as council has some type of positive recommendation around this work, we will continue with the plan for sure. So at the end of the day, I think either word is fine.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, would you take the chair? Thank you. So I'm actually going to argue in favor of the word endorse. The reason is that we received a 20-minute presentation that was data-driven, that explained very clearly where this particular needs assessment comes from. It showed very clearly that we are making the biggest move towards intensification that we have ever made as a city. Also, should make the point that the population growth that we're seeing is not hypothetical. We've been living it for 5 years. So I think based on that, I will vote for endorse, because I think that the data is there, the evidence is there. And if I could just say one thing, expansion of the urban boundary does not mean sprawl. It only means sprawl if we develop in such a way that we have very low density, that's car-dependent communities, that basically forces everybody to drive and creates lots of additional environmental impacts. There is no reason why we cannot both expand and create intensified, complete communities like we've already talked about. If we don't expand, we will drive the housing for young families into Amherstview, into Gananoque, into surrounding communities, and we will actually increase the amount of car dependence in our region. So for those reasons, I actually prefer endorse. I think we actually need to say, this is actually the environmentally responsible move, given the amount of growth pressures that we're seeing. Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Sanik, you do still have the last word if there's anything else to say. Okay, so we're going to do 2 votes. So the first will be on the amendment to change the word endorse to receive. I'm not seeing it. I just told the deputy clerk how to vote for me, so. Yeah, I directed him to vote. Okay, and that loses by a vote of 5 to 8. So now we'll do the vote on the second amendment. So this is now on the second clause. Call the vote. So I think I'm just going to step in. Just given the time pressure and the amount of work that we have, this is adding a lot of extra time for us. So I'm just going to propose we just move to hand votes. If that's reasonable? Okay. So we'll do the vote then on the second clause. All those in favor? Opposed? And that loses by a vote of 1 to 12. Councillor Sanik in the minority. Okay, so we're back to the main item now as not amended. Councillor Sanik, you still have a minute on the clock if there's anything else? Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak to clause 2? Okay, if not, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, clause 3, additional residential unit housing initiative. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. Sorry. Okay, clause 4, inclusive play project. Councillor Toza.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, recognizing the late hour, I'll be brief. I just want to give a shout out to all the councillors who wore shirts, came out and saw the crew. Thank you, everybody, and to Rachel and the team who organized it and have organized more. Isn't this great to see a community project that started a year ago and look how much progress they have made? I'm humbly urging everyone in this council to endorse this tonight. Think of what addition this would make to Kingston, and that we're really starting a kind of new park that could be a pilot for all other parks in the area. So great work to the community, great work everybody, and great work to city staff for working so well on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Ostroff.
Forgive me, this is about the inclusive play, right? Yes, I'm very supportive of this, not of course, but along with everyone else. I just wanted to know in the funding and the sourcing of these funds through the reserve fund, if the project, is it already written in there, I believe, that the project raises all these funds, is there a way to recover this, or how do we manage that? No, or this is just going to be money given?
Commissioner Joyce.
Thank you, and through you, what we have in the recommendation is that if funding comes forward that exceeds the amount that is required for the project, that this $300,000 or the excess amount that is raised would be used towards inclusive play equipment at other playgrounds.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, we will call the vote on clause 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, clause 5, capital project status report, May 31st, 2024. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 6, audited financial statements and other financial information of the City of Kingston. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 72 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Chinani, seconded by Councillor Glenn, that report 72 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, there are 2 clauses. I'm going to suppose that we will deal with them separately or together. Would anyone like to separate them? No. Okay, we will vote on them together. So clause 1 is zoning bylaw amendment for 40 Hyperion Court. Clause 2, zoning bylaw amendment 64 Barrack Street and 235, 237 Wellington Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. Moving on to report number 73 from the Kingston Heritage Properties Committee.
Moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that report 73 from Kingston Heritage Properties Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, would anyone like any of these applications separated? If not, we'll vote on the report as a whole. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Report number 74 from the Administrative Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Ridge, seconded by Councillor Glenn, that report 74 from the Administrative Policies Committee be received and adopted. And just a reminder that because the
Yes.
audited financial statement supplemental report was approved, item 1, it can be withdrawn.
Thank you. So item 1 is removed. So we have just items 2 and 3. Would anyone like to deal with those separately? If not, clause 2 is short-term rental bylaw amendments. Clause 3, tax write-offs pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Report number 75 from the Nominations Committee.
Moved by Councillor Tozo, seconded by Councillor Amos, that Report 75 from the Nominations Committee be received and adopted.
So there's just the one clause, public appointment to the Kingston Frontenac Public Library Board. And so that would appoint Sonia Verdrowski to the board. Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have nothing from Committee of the Whole. Information reports. If you have any questions, just raise your hand as I read through them. Number 1, quarterly report, Tourism Kingston, Q2 2024. Number 2, quarterly report, Kingston Economic Development Corporation, Q2 2024. Number 3, report on real estate transactions completed from January 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2024. Number 4, June 2024 tender and contract awards subject to delegation of authority. Number 5, Kingston Police Services Board operating budget status as at June 30th, 2024. Number 6, request for noise exemption, the Frontenac Club supplemental report. Okay, we have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business, we have several items. Number 1, moved by Councillor Shave, seconded by Councillor Tozo, that is requested by Lubomir Luchik, Ukrainian Club of Kingston. City Council proclaim August 24th, 2024 as Ukrainian Independence Day in the city of Kingston. Number 2, proclamation Jour des Franco-Ontariens et Franco-Ontariennes. Moved by Councillor Shanny, seconded by Councillor Stephen, that is requested by Maurice Fortius, Association Canadienne Française de l'Ontario, Conseil Régional de Belle-Île. City Council proclaims September 25th, 2024 as Jour des Franco-Ontariens et Franco-Ontariennes in the city of Kingston. Number 3, moved by Councillor Amos, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that is requested by Nancy Nichols, Seniors for Climate. City Council proclaim October 1st, 2024 as Seniors for Climate Day in the city of Kingston. Number 4, moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that is requested by Raphael Wash-Beauchamp, Kingston Humane Society. City Council proclaim August 23rd, 2024 as Kingston Humane Society Day in the city of Kingston. So we'll call the vote on all 4 of those motions. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motion. So we have 4 new motions this evening. So new motion number 1, moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Chinani. Whereas the Administrative Monetary Penalty System, AMPS, is an enforcement tool approved by the provincial government in August of 2009, whereas AMPS are used as a replacement to the Part 1 Provincial Offences Act ticket system, as it provides a flexible and streamlined appeal process and the ability for the municipality to apply unpaid penalties to the property taxes. And whereas AMPS free up valuable provincial offences court time, saving the province and municipalities valuable resources and funds. And whereas administrative penalties were written into the Building Code Act in December of 2017 under Section 18.1, however have not received royal assent. Whereas AMPS have proven to be a valuable tool for education and enforcement of other municipal bylaws within the City of Kingston. Whereas supporting housing affordability is the first pillar of the Kingston Strategic Plan 2023 to 2026. Therefore be it resolved that Kingston City Council authorize the clerk to send correspondence on behalf of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the Honourable Paul Calandra, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable Premier Doug Ford, MPP John Jordan and MPP Ted Hsu, and Lieutenant Governor Edith Dumont, asking that AMPS receive royal assent to free up time for building inspectors to support housing supply action plans instead of having to attend court. Councillor Glenn, you have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll make this fairly brief. This really is about cleaning up kind of a low-hanging fruit here that would prove beneficial for our building department. So I'm actually going to ask Ms. Kapner-Hunt to comment on what this would do in terms of the ability of staff to be a little bit more efficient in the execution of their duties.
Ms. Kepner-Hutt.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So the administrative monetary penalties has been in place for a while, as you guys know. It's also been just implemented into the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, as well as they put it in place for property standards back in 2017. So the province is moving to put AMPs in place just to try to improve the process and take some of the time off the court system. I know within our current system with AMPs, we do have some challenges within our municipality, so we will have to refine some of our processes if the government does decide to put this in place. But right now, we're seeing an uptake, a lot more construction without a permit across the city. So our number of cases have increased from about 200 to almost 400 a year right now. So it's a lot of work for the staff to deal with, and most of the court cases, when we go to court, they drag on for a year to 2 years, depending on what the court case is. So it will free up some of the staff time, not in terms of their inspection notes and the work that they have to do to present the evidence, because we would still have the hearing and screening process. But what we're hoping with the government is that we will have a prescribed process within the legislation for the fines, and also where it can be collected on the tax base specifically, so that we're not looking to try to collect it through our finance department.
Okay, thank you very much. So suffice it to say, this has been the intent of the government, but they've been dragging their feet on completing this. So this is simply to urge them to get this done. So it would free up staff time. It would allow us to administer monetary penalties, which would be financially beneficial, and ultimately to allow us as a municipality, and other municipalities for that matter, who have already submitted similar letters, to operate more efficiently. If our job is to build housing and build it quickly, then we need to be a bit more efficient, and having our staff not have to appear in court is certainly one of the things that could be brought to bear to speed this up a little bit. So I'm hoping that you'll support sending a letter off to encourage the government to finish this job.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. So I have a question either for the mover or staff, because the whereas clauses doesn't give me context here. It says December 2017 was when it was passed under royal assent. That would have been under the previous Liberal government, if I'm remembering the recent election. Has this been passed by the Ford government and we're waiting for royal assent, or are we asking them to reintroduce it, pass it through 3 readings of Queen's Park, and then pass it to royal assent? Where is this at right now? The whereas clauses don't give me any background on this.
Ms. Kepner-Hutt.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So it has, it's been implemented in the Building Code Act under 18.1. However, the framework is there, but they haven't enacted the regulations and the legislation to be able, for staff to be able to impose the fines.
Sorry, so I'm still not clear. So it's, where is that, like, what's the delay here? Is it royal assent that we're waiting for? Is it, like, where is it? Because this is not clear to me.
Yeah, it is. We're waiting for royal assent.
So we're lobbying, like, who's holding this up? Is it the lieutenant governor, or is it the government?
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, I think I know what you're getting at, Councillor Tozo. So this would have been legislation that was enabled under a previous government, but there are other planning examples, and Ms. Morley may be able to provide further clarification, but sometimes there's legislation that's created, but then the province doesn't follow through with the implementing framework, which comes by way of the regulations that receive royal assent. So I think it can receive multiple readings and then be sitting there and not receive royal assent. I don't know, Ms. Morley, do you have any idea as to why it's been sitting? There are several sections of the Planning Act that are similar to this, that they're there, high level in legislation, however, staff cannot utilize them because the implementing framework has never been put in place by any seated government. So it does happen sometimes in this circumstance. I don't know if there's any other background you have.
Ms. Morley?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. It's not uncommon for the government to create these provisions and then not yet bring them into force. So it's just that the government hasn't yet proclaimed them into force, into law. So that's something that has to be done before we can implement the framework.
And sorry, because I love parliamentary procedure, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, you know I'm not, Your Worship. So this, even though it's from a previous government, and there's been, like, it's from a Liberal government, we're at lobbying right now the government to implement something that has gone through Queen's Park, and it's just sort of waiting for it to be implemented, if I'm understanding it. And it doesn't have to go through 3 readings of government again. Okay, heads are nodding no. What a wonderful democracy we have. Okay, with that procedural clarification, I am happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this? Okay, so we'll call the vote then on new motion number 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motion number 2, moved by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Osanek. Whereas pollinator gardens are essential for supporting local biodiversity, providing habitat for bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, and enhancing the aesthetic appeal of urban areas. And whereas the City of Kingston is committed to promoting environmentally sustainable practices and improving urban green spaces. And whereas a bylaw to amend City of Kingston bylaw number 2007-136, a bylaw to provide for maintaining land in a clean and clear condition to A, add a definition of prohibited plants, and B, to require every owner, lessee, or occupant to keep their grounds free from any prohibited plants, has received 2 readings by council and is scheduled to receive 3rd reading on August 13, 2024. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to prepare a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2004-190, a bylaw to regulate the use of city streets, to permit the owner, lessee, or occupant of an adjoining property to improve the boulevard by planting 1 or more plants, provided the plant is not a prohibited plant, the plant does not obstruct or pose a danger to the safety of persons using the boulevard, the public sidewalk, or other parts of the highway. The plant does not interfere with the activities or adversely affect the condition or operation of the equipment or facilities of the city, Utilities Kingston, or their agents. If an owner, lessee, or occupant plants a plant in a boulevard, the owner, lessee, or occupant must maintain the plant. The city will be deemed to own any plant planted in a boulevard and may remove, injure, or destroy any such plant at any time and for any purpose. The staff recommended amending bylaw to council for all 3 readings no later than the end of September 2024. Councillor Glenn, you have the floor again.
Thank you, and through you. So again, this is a bit of a cleanup. When we were contemplating pollinator gardens, one of the things we didn't discuss was the boulevard. There are a number of residents who already have gardens on boulevards. And so right now, typically, nothing happens provided nobody complains. But when somebody complains, then we've left this gap where bylaw has no choice but to go out and tell them to remove it because we don't allow it. So this actively allows for plantings on the boulevard. What it does also do is allow for us to remain in control of the boulevards. So if necessary and we have to do something on the boulevard, we can go and get those removed. If we have to dig for something, whatever has to occur there. There's recognition in here for safety concerns and considerations in that public space. But I think this speaks better to the intent of what we were trying to do, which was to encourage positive planting of flowers that would certainly help with our pollinators and hopefully beautify the city as well along the way. So I hope everyone will support this. I think it just, again, does that little bit of cleanup to make sure that we're moving forward with what we intend to do in terms of the environment here in Kingston. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. I'm really happy to see this motion. This is something that Kyle Compo and I actually talked about months ago, and I was really excited to see that this is a piece of policy we're finally putting into place. It's a good idea. I just have a couple things I want to clarify and just make sure either staff or this is covered under the motion or just for feedback, generally speaking. I just want to make sure in Lakeside District, when you think of the boulevard, you often think of a sidewalk and there's the grass between the sidewalk and the road. Lakeside has a lot of ditches. So I just want to check with staff, are ditches kind of considered part of the boulevard in this case?
Ms. Santucci.
through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the ditches are included. Again, we would need to look at what's planting in those. If it's plants, that's one thing. If we're getting into shrubs and trees, that will create some issues, but this is meant for pollinator plants and plants similar to that.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, another question. So sometimes there was one member of my community in my district who had it was a morning glory or some sort of flowering plant climbing a pole, which was technically against the bylaws. So just wondering, are pole climbing flowers considered in this as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't actually have a list of what those plants would be that we would allow and not allow. I think that is something that we would need to take a look at. I don't have an answer for that right now, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Totally understandable. Just would like you to consider polls if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Joyce, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. So the poles are generally owned by Utilities Kingston or other providers, and normally that would be frowned upon because it can add to accelerated rot of the pole.
Okay, Councillor Shaves.
Thank you. I just have a question in regards to the third bullet, where it states the plant does not interfere with the activities of or adverse affect the condition or operation of the equipment or facilities of the city, Utilities Kingston, or their agents. I don't see where it just says it's plants. It could be trees too, because there are pollinating trees as well. I'm just wondering, this just refers to, like, who's going to verify if they interfere with these utilities, and also the infrastructure underneath the ground is not actually stated as well, because mostly these boulevards is where the infrastructure is located. That's the reason why sometimes the city plants its trees on the property of the resident and not in the boulevard. I just want to make sure our infrastructure is safe.
Commissioner Joyce.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The plants are of less concern, obviously, than tree roots and with respect to underground infrastructure. And it would be Public Works that would be doing the assessment whether or not the plant is violating that specific clause in the resolution or the motion.
So to verify, is there anything within this motion which states that a resident would have to verify with Public Works first before doing their planting?
I think it would be more generated on a complaint basis or as staff come across the issue, more than requiring those individuals to seek the specific permission from the city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else on new motion number 2? Councillor Glenn, you have the last word if there's anything else you wanted to say. Okay, we'll call the vote then. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motion number 3. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff. Whereas the substantial staff cuts affecting television journalists, radio personalities, and multiple on-air programs have had a sudden and direct impact on the lives of many residents of Kingston and the surrounding area, and signal a further erosion of community engagement and democratic participation for people who live, work, and play in this region. And whereas the removal of on-air personalities from 2 radio stations in the market means a dramatic reduction in locally produced content that reflects activities in Kingston. Whereas a significant reduction in television news staff has already been felt throughout the community, with local coverage of news and events severely diminished. And whereas local news and radio are the foundation of democracy in any community, ensuring that its residents remain well informed and are able to hear about and engage in civic-related and other matters. And whereas the continued disappearance of local coverage in many municipalities should be alarming to all levels of government, as it means fewer ways for citizens to engage in community activities, political and otherwise, and an overall reduction in ways to remain well informed. Therefore, be it resolved that Kingston City Council encourage the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, Kingston's members of Provincial Parliament and members of Parliament, to make this increasingly dire situation a priority and ensure the respective levels of government are taking steps to avoid adequate and additional support to local journalism, ensuring the long-term viability of local media in the name of community engagement and democratic participation. and that a copy of this motion be forwarded to the Honorable Pascal St-Onge, PC MP, Minister of Canadian Heritage, Mark Gerritsen, Kingston and the Islands MP, Scott Reed, Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, MPP Ted Hsu, Kingston and the Islands, MPP John Jordan, Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, Vicky Atreides, Chairperson and CEO, CRTC, and CRTC Vice Chairpersons Adam Scott and Natalie Taberge. Deputy Mayor Hassan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I won't say much because the delegation earlier in the beginning of the meeting, they have said a lot. Just few words I want to say that the local media is a very essential and integral part of our community when it's come to inform our local community and ourselves. I'm sitting here as a city councillor, and it's a lot of role media, local media has played to educate me about my civic responsibility. Reading article about the distinguished politicians and citizens and their work for the community gave me the sense of community and gave me the sense of how to serve the community from this platform. It was very important, and a lot of the big population in our city is retired population, is senior population. They are still, many of them, old school. They don't like to use the social media, and social media is the killer of our local media outlets. They rely on daily based information, whether it's political, social, or about the communities. Local media played a lot of role to supporting our local communities, organization, nonprofit organization who serve our most vulnerable community. Through the radio, through the morning show on the TV, whether it is article in the Whig Standard and the Kingston, they're very important component in our community to keep us well informed. And I think it's time for us, not as a council, but as a Kingstonian as well, that we should stand up and show our support, whether it is symbolic or a real support, whatever we can do to show that we stand with them and let the authorities know that local media is very essential for local community, and we seeking their help and support to retain what we have and to bring the media back, the television and radio in our city, so we can enjoy the information and the entertainment and their support to build a better community, a better city for our children. Also, I like to urge through this motion and through the council and the opportunity to my fellow Kingstonians, so they should consider to subscribe all those media we remaining in Kingston to support them, so we at least we can sustain and we can support them financially and morally as well, so we can continue to enjoy those information come through every morning, whether through the radio, television, or the newspaper. Thank you very much. Urge my colleagues, please support this motion. We'll appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Councillor Toso.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. Well, oh.
Go ahead.
Are you playing a joke on me? No. Okay, it's late. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hassan, for this. I'll be brief. Yeah, I mean, it is heartbreaking to see our local news networks disintegrate before our very eyes, and local news. I think what's important to highlight, I just want to give a personal experience of my background in political science, is that when local news and media go away, they're not replaced by national news. And I think that's what they're replaced by is misinformation and local echo chambers. And having studied the United States, one thing that's really exacerbated their polarization has been a lack of faith in news. This is not just damaging for citizens who want to know what is going on locally, it's damaging to our democracy. Because what people will fill their news with is Facebook, it's Twitter, it's social media, and that will reaffirm people's biases of the worst kind. The loudest voices are not the many. There's a great quote I love from the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. We need the media to shed light on what happens locally and shed light on what happens provincially. It helps us keep politicians accountable, but also helps inform our community to make good decisions when it comes to voting. This is a bad day for democracy. And thank you, Councillor Hassan. This is a brilliant motion. Deputy Mayor. See, I didn't read that in the I didn't read that in the local news, and I got it wrong. So yeah, but no one will know I made the mistake because it's not going to be covered on the local news. So yeah, there you go. A great motion, Deputy Mayor. Pleased to support, but we really do need to take the death of local journalism quite seriously. And if you can, please support the outlets that are left. They need your support. They need your support. So thank you.
Thank you. Next time, this is Councillor Rich.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Well, Councillor Tozo said much of what I was going to say, but I will highlight a few pieces. As very just for the record, I seconded this motion, so I'm a little confused about the what was read there. But anyways, I do want to just highlight something that Councillor Tozo was touching upon with regards to local media representation and democratic action. Specifically that we've looked at our last provincial election, which was 2022, which had the lowest turnout ever at 43.5% provincial election. And our last municipal election was 30.5% in terms of turnout. And I do think that one of the major contributing factors to that is the reduction of local media coverage. It's a reduction of engagement on all levels. And when Deputy Mayor Hassan reached out to me about this, I was happy to second it because I'd heard from more people about what was going on with local media than I have about anything else. And that's because it plays a really large and important role in people's lives. It's a way for them to be engaged with the community, with the important events that are going on. In even just that tangential way where they're being informed. And so I would want to also echo, we need to support the media that's there. This is about on-air media specifically, but also our print media too. We need to support them. So there we go. So yeah, I'm happy to support this. I'm happy to, I hope everybody else does. And I know it's really late, so I want to have a really quick anecdote to end this. I got to get in. I watched CKWNS News growing up my whole life. I was absolutely amazed. I got to get interviewed and grilled by Bill Hutchins. And I said, before the interview started, Mr. Hutchins, I'm so excited about this. I've been watching you my whole life. And Mr. Hutchins said, maybe that may have been too much. But yeah, no, so local media is important. It plays a role, and we should do what we can to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, Councillor Rich, you are listed as the seconder of this motion. I'm not sure where, anyway, I must have made a mistake there, so. Oh, okay, no problem. Anyways, we fixed it. You're listed as a seconder. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the motion? Okay. If not, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motion number 4. Moved by Councillor Chinani, seconded by Councillor Ridge. Whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, represents the interests of municipalities on policy and program matters that fall within federal jurisdiction, whereas FCM has been the national voice of municipal government since 1901. They represent more than 2,100 municipalities of all sizes, from Canada's cities and rural communities to northern communities and 20 provincial and territorial municipal associations. Together, they represent more than 92% of all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And whereas FCM's board of directors is comprised of elected municipal officials from all regions and sizes of communities to form a broad base of support and provide FCM with a united voice to carry the municipal message to the federal government. Whereas FCM allows a limited number of non-board members to serve on FCM committees and forums to further their advocacy and policy efforts. Whereas standing committees and forums typically meet in September and March, the November board meeting is dedicated to advocacy days when FCM board members are in Ottawa to advocate to federal political leaders on critical municipal priorities. Whereas the city has benefited from having a council representative on FCM in the past with a greater connection to municipal federal advocacy and policy formation efforts, and whereas nominations to FCM must be supported by a council motion indicating the financial support of that council. Therefore, be it resolved that Council of the City of Kingston supports Sydenham District Councillor Connie Glenn to serve on FCM committees and attend committee and forum meetings, and the Council assumes all costs associated with Councillor Glenn attending FCM's committee and Board of Directors meetings. So the mover is Councillor Giannini. You have the floors.
Hello. Yeah, so a lot like last year, I just wanted to say that there was a lot of value in having Councillor Glenn advocating for Kingston and participating on FCM committees, and that her continued presence and attendance highlighting Kingston's needs and perspectives on a federal forum is essential. I am proud to support Councillor Glenn in representing Kingston at FCM committees and forums to advance their priorities, so I hope that everyone will support this again. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no one else who wishes to speak, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Glenn, you did want to speak. Go for it.
I only want to speak because I wanted the opportunity to publicly thank the members of council who attended FCM and supported me in my efforts to run for a board position. I also wanted to highlight one of the reasons that I decided to come back for committee. There is no representation from anyone in Ontario, from basically Whitby all the way to the Quebec border and north up to Ottawa. So Ottawa has automatic members on the board. So there's this huge swath of Eastern Ontario that has literally no representation at the board level. So I think it's important that we remember that Eastern Ontario has different needs than large city Ottawa and Toronto, et cetera. And it's really important that we have those voices at the table. So I'm very happy to go back to that. I had opportunity to participate in advocacy days, which means people are still aware that Kingston is here, and also to promote some of the things that were really important to members of this council, for example, a national food program. So I had opportunity to speak to that at committee and get the support of FCM to move that forward. So thank you very much to the support that I received from everyone, and I really appreciate the opportunity to hopefully continue to do that and to promote Kingston on a national level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Glenn. We'll call the vote then on new motion number 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no further motions. Are there any notices of motion? If not, Madam Clerk, ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Shaves, that the minutes of City Council meeting 18-2024 held Tuesday, July 9th, 2024 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have a number of communications. Is there any other business? Okay, Madam Clerk, ask for bylaws, please.
Councillor Amos, you're excused for the first 2 bylaw votes. First vote, moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaw 3 be given its first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Second vote, moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaw 3 be given its third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And
Councillor Amos, you may return. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaws 1, 2, and 4 through 8 and 12 be given their first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
And finally, moved by Deputy Mayor Hassan, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that bylaws 1, 2, and 7 through 12 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Stephen. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thanks very much.